There is a kind of man who survives catastrophe by deciding it never mattered. He buries the wound so deep it becomes structural, bone, not bruise. Alpha Ronan Ashvale was that man. 12 years running the hardest pack in the North, 12 years telling himself that the woman who vanished took nothing worth keeping. He built an empire on that lie. He believed it completely. Right up until the moment a boy no one recognized walked onto a proving ground, knocked one of his finest warriors into the dirt, and said a name that cracked Ronan's chest open like a rifle shot. Drop your city in the comments. Stay until the end. This one's going to cost you something. The Iron Hollow Pack gathered once every 3 years at the Coldstone Flats, a stretch of wind-hammered plateau in the northern highlands where the tree line gave up and the sky took over. Every major pack sent representatives. The strongest sent their alpha. Ronan Ashvale sent himself because Iron Hollow did not negotiate through intermediaries, and because 12 years of iron-handed leadership had made him the kind of man who needed to be seen. He rode in on the second morning, ahead of his second-in-command Dax and the 6-wolf escort that protocol demanded. The Coldstone Flats smelled like pine resin and old ambition. The temporary pavilions were already up, canvas stretched on lodgepole frames, cook fires dug into stone rings, the low, constant sound of packs being political. Ronan dismounted without ceremony and handed his reins to nobody in particular. He was 41 years old. 6'2", lean the way winter makes a man lean, with hands that had broken things they shouldn't have, and a face that wore the record of those decisions. Gray threaded his dark hair at the temples. He had not softened. The years had not granted him the comfortable bulk some alphas wore like authority. They had carved him down instead, stripped the excess, left something harder and less forgiving than he'd started out as. Dax fell into step beside him. Dax Mercer had been with Ronan since before the title, since they were both young men with nothing to lose and a talent for damage. He was broader than Ronan, quieter, the kind of loyal that didn't require speeches. Greenbrook Alpha wants a meeting, Dax said. Something about the Eastern Corridor boundaries. He can want it. He's been pushing that corridor claim for 2 years, and I've been telling him no for 2 years. That's a conversation, Dax, not a negotiation. Ronan scanned the pavilions, the clusters of wolves marking territory through proximity. Who else? Stoneback sent their full showing. Their alpha's daughter is apparently doing the circuit, wants to be seen. Good for her. And there's a proving ground event this afternoon. Open challenge. Some of the younger wolves are using it to build rep. Ronan didn't answer. He'd done the circuit when he was 23, built his own reputation the same way, blood and outcome on neutral ground. He didn't romanticize it. You showed up, you performed, you went home with either a position or a lesson. I'll watch an hour, he said. Then the Greenbrook meeting, get it over with. What else? There's a pack designation filing. New sanctuary outfit operating about 60 miles northwest of our boundary. They're registering for neutral status. Ronan stopped walking. Around him, the crowd noise continued, the low, complex hum of assembled power. He kept his face where it was, undisturbed, the expression he wore the way other men wore armor. Name, he said. Haven's Ridge. They've been operating about 4 years according to the filing. Abandoned wolves, displaced pups. Welfare outfit. Dax paused. Alpha designation listed as Serena Vale. Silence. Dax had the good sense to let it sit. Ronan walked again. His stride didn't change. His heartbeat was his own business. File it, he said. Ronan, file it. Neutral status. Note that Iron Hollow has no objection. He said it the way he issued any operational directive. Clean, complete, done. Was there something else? Dax looked at him for a moment with an expression that didn't quite make it to concern. No. Then let's see this proving ground. Was. The proving ground at Coldstone was a circle of compressed earth about 30 feet across, bordered by stacked stone that served no structural purpose and every symbolic one. The crowd around it was 3 deep by mid-afternoon. Proving ground events were the entertainment and the business in one. You learned which packs were producing strong young wolves, which lineages were developing well, who was coming up. Ronan stood at the outer edge with Dax on his left and his escort fanned back. He wasn't there to be entertained. He was cataloging, reading the fighters the way he read anything that might one day matter to his pack's position. The Stoneback girl was good, technical, composed, a little too conservative. She'd win more than she'd lose, but she wouldn't be remembered. Two young wolves from the Copper Ridge pack showed promise, though the taller one telegraphed his shoulder before every right-side attack, a habit someone should have broken before it became instinct. The afternoon's last pairing was announced by the event handler, a gray-haired man from the host pack who had been doing this long enough to care about nothing except pronunciation. Open challenge, unenrolled entry, no affiliation listed, against Cade Wren of Iron Hollow. The crowd noise adjusted slightly. Cade Wren was one of Ronan's elite guard, 26, fast, with an unbeaten proving ground record over 4 circuits. He was not the kind of opponent an unenrolled unknown requested unless they had something to prove or very poor judgment. Cade stepped in from the north side of the ring. He was the right size for what he did, compact, explosive, the kind of build that was always closer than you thought. He surveyed the crowd with the mild confidence of someone who had done this many times and expected to do it many more. The challenger entered from the south. He was young. Ronan registered that first, recalibrated his expectation. 14 at most, maybe 13, carrying the height of someone who hadn't finished growing into himself yet. Already 5'10", with the lean, long-boned structure of adolescence not quite resolved. Dark hair. He moved without performance, no crowd working, no display. He took his position in the circle and stood still. The handler looked between them with the neutral expression of a man who had stopped predicting outcomes years ago. "Challenge stands," he said. "Begin when ready." Cade moved first. He was experienced enough not to underestimate youth, but he was also experienced enough that early moves were half-automatic. Test the footwork, establish range, read the response. He came in with a controlled sequence, probing. The boy moved wrong. Not incorrectly, wrong in the sense that it wasn't the response Cade was built to anticipate. He stepped inside the probe instead of away from it, absorbed the opening contact with a rotation that redirected rather than blocked, and came back with his elbow at an angle that had no business being where it was at his age and size. Cade adjusted. The fight continued. It lasted 4 minutes. The crowd had stopped making noise somewhere around minute 2. What they were watching was not a young wolf getting lucky against a veteran. What they were watching was technical, purposeful. The boy fought like someone who had been taught by a person who understood violence in its structural dimensions, not its performance, not its theater, but its actual mechanical reality. He was patient in a way that adolescents almost never were. He absorbed, redirected, waited for the geometry to favor him, and when it did, he committed completely. Cade Wren went down on the third exchange. Not a stumble, down. One knee, both hands, the unmistakable posture of a body that had been taken past its ability to continue. The crowd processed this in silence for approximately 2 seconds. Then the noise came. Ronan stood still and watched the boy. The boy didn't celebrate. He stepped back from Cade, checked that he was functional, and turned to face the handler. His breathing was elevated but controlled. There was a cut above his right eye, shallow, already clotting. He didn't touch it. "Clean fight," he said. His voice had the not-quite-settled quality of a voice still deciding what register it lived in. "No lasting injury to the other fighter." The handler nodded. "The unenrolled challenger wins. Name for the record." The boy looked at the crowd, not challenging them, not performing. He was looking for something, or checking something. "Kieran," he said. "Kieran Vale. Chat." Ronan heard it the way you hear a sound that precedes injury, the moment before comprehension, when the body already knows. Vale. He did not move. Around him the crowd was already reacting to the upset, to the spectacle of a young unknown dropping one of Iron Hollow's finest, to the name that most of them had no context for. Dax said nothing. Dax's silence had a specific texture when it was intentional, and right now it was very intentional. The handler was recording the name. Cade was on his feet, being checked by one of his pack's wolves, the expression on his face carrying a complex mixture of professional humiliation and something else, something like surprised respect. Ronan walked toward the ring. The crowd separated for him. This was partly his alpha projection, the thing he'd spent 20 years building until it was involuntary, and partly just the fact of him. The way he moved when he was moving toward something specific had always made people step back. He stopped at the stone border. The boy, Kieran, was still in the circle. He'd turned at the crowd movement, tracked Ronan's approach without retreating. He stood with his weight balanced and his hands at his sides, and he looked at Ronan with eyes that were a color Ronan recognized from a context he did not permit himself to access often. Green, not the flat green of common coloring. A specific shade, amber-threaded, that Ronan had not seen in 12 years. He kept his voice controlled. It had never been difficult for him. That particular discipline was deep as anything in him. "Kieran Vale," he said. "Yes. You challenged one of my wolves." He accepted. The boy's voice was even, not aggressive, not performed, just level, the way someone was level when they'd decided in advance not to be moved. "I won clean. Your fighter will have no lasting damage. I know my fighter's condition." Ronan looked at him. The face was young, still carrying the unfinished quality of adolescence, but the structure underneath it, the jaw, the set of the brow, this was a face that knew where it was going. "How old are you?" 12. 12. 12 years. The math was not math. It was a verdict. "Who trained you?" Ronan said. "My mother." Around them, the crowd had not precisely gone quiet. Conversations continued. The event noise continued. But the people within range of this exchange had oriented toward it. They were listening. Ronan was aware of this and did not care. "Your mother trained you to fight like that." "My mother trained me to survive," Kieran said. "The fighting came from that." Ronan let a beat pass. He was buying time, which was not something he did often and which felt wrong in his mouth. He was buying time because something was moving in his chest that he needed to locate and secure before it expressed itself in a way he couldn't take back. "Serena Vale," he said. The boy's expression shifted slightly. Not surprise, recognition of something expected. "Yes. She's here. She filed for neutral status this morning. We're registered." He held Ronan's gaze. No deference in it. No hostility either. Something cleaner and more final than hostility. "We have every right to be here." "I didn't say otherwise." "You were about to." Ronan's jaw tightened. Around him he could feel Dax's attention, the escort's attention, the attention of every wolf close enough to see an alpha being spoken to by a 12-year-old with a fresh cut over his eye and absolutely no adjustment in his posture. "Boy," Ronan said, "my name is Kieran." The word dropped into the exchange like a stone into still water. Not rude, not a performance of defiance, a correction. A statement of the terms under which this conversation would occur or not occur at all. Ronan looked at his son. The word formed in his mind without permission, and the thing it moved in his chest was the thing he'd been managing for 12 years and had apparently not finished managing. And he said very carefully, "Kieran, where's your mother?" "She'll find you when she's ready." A pause, brief, waited. "She knows you're here." "And you came to the proving ground." "I came to compete." Something moved in the boy's face then, a flicker of something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief, and might have been both operating at a temperature below the visible threshold. "I didn't come for you." Ronan heard that. He received it without expression because expression was not available to him in this particular moment, and because the boy deserved the respect of a response that was honest rather than one that was managed. "I know," Ronan said. Kieran studied him for a moment. Those amber-green eyes that were Serena's and belonged to a face that had his bone structure underneath it, and the combination of those two things was producing something in Ronan's sternum that he had no adequate language for. Then Kieran said, "I carry my mother's name." He said it quietly. Not for the crowd, not for Dax or the escort or anyone else in range. He said it directly to Ronan, holding his gaze with the steady, specific patience of someone who had been waiting a long time to say exactly this. "I've never needed yours." The pavilion Ronan used that night was at the far edge of the Coldstone encampment, separated from the cluster of larger structures by a strip of open ground that no one had filled in, either by design or because proximity to the Iron Hollow contingent required a certain level of commitment that most packs didn't volunteer. He He sat in a camp chair outside the pavilion with a cup of something that had gone cold an hour ago and stared at the tree line. The night was clear and cold, the kind of cold that was honest about itself. Dax brought him a fresh cup without comment and sat on a crate nearby. They stayed like that for a while. "Say it," Ronan said. "Say what?" "Whatever you've been not saying for 6 hours." Dax turned the cup in his hands. He was one of the few people who had known Ronan before the title, before the grief, before the 12 years of compression. He was also one of the few people who had never been afraid of him. "You look like you got hit," Dax said. "I did get hit. I mean something you didn't see coming." Ronan's thumb moved along the rim of the cup. The ceramic was cold, a specific grounding sensation. "I knew she was here. I heard the filing." Knowing a name on a document and standing 3 feet from her kid are different things. Her kid. The phrase was flat in Ronan's mouth. Not a correction, just the pressure of what was actually being said. "He's 12, Dax." "Yeah. She was already gone when I—" He stopped. Ran the arithmetic again, the arithmetic he'd been running since the proving ground, since he'd heard the name and done the addition and arrived at the only answer the numbers allowed. She was already carrying him when she left. Dax was quiet. "She never told me." "Ronan, she never told me." His voice was not loud. It was the opposite of loud, compressed to a density that required effort to produce. "She left. She was already, and she never sent a word. She never sent anything. 12 years and not—" He stopped himself, set the cup down on the ground with a precision that was its own kind of violence. "I should have been told," he said. "He should have had—" He pressed his mouth shut. The sentence did not have a completion that he was willing to produce in this context. Dax said carefully, "You going to talk to her?" "Yes." "How?" "I'll wait until she comes to me. The boy said she would. And if she doesn't, she will." He was certain of this in a way he couldn't have explained. Serena Vale had always been someone who faced what needed to be faced. It was part of why her leaving had broken something in the architecture of his understanding of her. "She'll come." Dax nodded, looked at the tree line, looked back. "He's something, that kid." Despite everything, despite the cold cup and the hollow chest and the 12 years of math he was still reconciling, something moved in Ronan's face that might have been, in different circumstances, closer to pride. He killed it before it became anything. "Don't," he said. "I'm not saying anything." "Good." They sat in the dark for another hour. She came before dawn. Ronan heard her footsteps on the compressed earth 20 feet out and didn't turn around. He'd been awake since the small hours, sleep had presented itself and he'd declined, and was sitting outside again with a cup that was actually warm this time. The camp around them was in the deep quiet phase, the hour between last watch and first light, when even the wolves who didn't need much sleep had given it up. He turned when she was 10 feet away. 12 years. She was 36 now. He knew this the way he knew anything he'd chosen to stop thinking about, but had never actually stopped knowing. She looked. The word that arrived was different, which was not the same as diminished. She was leaner, more settled into herself, with the kind of bearing that develops in people who have spent years being responsible for others. Her hair was shorter. Her eyes were the same. He stood. She stopped at the edge of the pavilion's thrown light and looked at him with an expression that was doing many things at once. None of them were simple, and none of them were going to make this easier. "Serena," he said. "Ronan." The name in her voice after 12 years of silence was its own category of information. He filed it. "I heard about the registration," he said. "Havens Ridge. 4 years now. We're stable." Her voice was even, measured. She'd always had that quality, a groundedness that had seemed, when he was younger and less careful about such things, like peace. He knew now that it wasn't peace. It was will. It was someone making the active, constant decision not to be unmade. "We needed neutral status for operational security. The filing was appropriate." "I approved it." "I know." A pause. "Thank you." He moved past the formalities because the formalities were unbearable. "You brought him here." "He wanted to compete. I couldn't argue with the logic. He dropped Cade Wren. Something moved in her expression. Not quite a smile, too complicated and too exhausted to be just a smile. I know. I watched. You trained him like that. He has a good mind for it. The structural part, the way he sees geometry in a fight, that's him, not me. I taught him the foundation. He built the rest. Ronan looked at her. The distance between them was 8 feet of cold air and 12 years of accrued absence, and one boy sleeping somewhere in the camp who had his bone structure and her eyes and a name that wasn't Ronan's. Why? He said. The single word carried everything. She received it without flinching. You know why, she said. Or you're starting to. I know what I was told. His voice was controlled with the specific effort of a man controlling something that wants to move. I was told you left. That you rejected the bond, rejected Iron Hollow, rejected... I know what you were told. Then tell me what's true. She met his gaze. For a moment she was perfectly still in the way that he remembered, the specific stillness of Serena Vale in the instant before she decided to do something she'd already decided to do. I was told you wanted the child gone, she said, that an heir born outside the formal succession ceremony would be used against you, that Elder Croft had your authorization to ensure it didn't survive. The cold went through him from the inside. That's not... I know that now. Her voice was steady, and it cost her something to keep it that way. I didn't know it then. I was 3 weeks from delivery. I'd been kept from you for a week by procedural delays that I didn't understand yet, and Elder Croft came to me with documentation and witnesses and a story that was seamless. A breath. He said you'd signed the order yourself. He said you were protecting your throne. Ronan's hands had closed at his sides. He was not aware of this until he noticed the pressure in his knuckles. And you believed him. He had your seal. Her jaw tightened. He had witnesses. He had a transcript of a conversation I was told you'd had with your war council. It wasn't, Ronan, it wasn't a rumor I chose over trust. It was constructed. It was built to be believed. Croft, Aldrich Croft, who had served 3 alphas of Iron Hollow, who had been Iron Hollow's senior administrative elder for longer than Ronan's own memory, who had managed records and succession protocols and pack law with a precision that everyone had always interpreted as dedication. He came to me, Ronan said, and his voice had dropped to something barely audible, and told me you had rejected the bond, that you had contacted Greenbrook Pack, that you had made arrangements, that you had... He stopped. The words had been in him for 12 years, corrosive, and now they were different words, the same sounds carrying a different structure underneath. He had correspondence. He built 2 versions, Serena said, one for each of us. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes structural change, the kind of silence that exists in the moment when something load-bearing shifts and nothing has fallen yet, but everything is different. Kieran doesn't know this, Ronan said. No, I've been working out how to tell him. Her voice was careful and tired in a way that went deep. He grew up knowing your name, knowing what I knew at the time, knowing that his father chose his throne over his family. That's the story he has. And you didn't correct it. I corrected it when I had proof. She looked at him directly. I've had proof for 7 months. I'm still working out how to tell my son that the man he spent 12 years understanding as a clear-cut absence is actually... She paused. Complicated. Complicated. The word sat wrong. Serena, you became what Croft told me you were, she said. It wasn't accusation. It was more painful than accusation. It was observation. The ruthless alpha. The man who sealed the borders and consolidated power and spent 12 years running Iron Hollow like a siege operation. That's not the man I left. A breath. That's the man Aldrich Croft created a reason for you to become. The fire ring had burned down to coals. The light was gray-red and without much warmth. Ronan stood in it and felt something in his chest that he had no framework for because he had spent 12 years building the framework for something else entirely. He's still operational, Ronan said. I know. Croft, the implications were arriving now, layered, each one with consequences attached. If Croft had the operational capacity to construct what he'd described, the documentation, the witnesses, the coordinated deception across two parties simultaneously, then he'd been operating inside Iron Hollow's structure with a level of autonomy that required time, access, and protection, which meant he'd been serving some other interests the entire time, which meant 12 years of policy decisions, alliances, territorial judgments had been made by Ronan inside an information environment that one man had deliberately corrupted. Who does he work for? I don't know yet. She pulled a folded document from her jacket. But I have enough to confirm the construction of the deception. Witness statements. Original seals with verification marks that don't match your documented seal variants from that year. There are 2 wolves who helped him, who are still alive and who have agreed to testify, in exchange for relocation protection. Ronan took the document. He didn't open it. He held it. Why didn't you come to me? He said. 7 months ago, when you had proof. Why? Because I had a son who had built his entire identity on a specific understanding of who his father was. Her voice was quiet and exact. And before I walked into your territory and dropped a bomb into both your lives, I needed to know what kind of man you'd become. A pause. So I watched, she said. The summit was scheduled. I filed the neutral registration so I'd have access. And I watched how you operated, how you treated your wolves, what Iron Hollow looked like from the outside after 12 years of you. Another pause, weighted with something that might have been the beginning of something or the end of it. I wanted to know if you were worth telling. Ronan stood very still. The document was in his hands, and the coals were dying, and the sky was beginning to show the first gray edge of coming dawn. And, he said. Serena looked at him for a long moment. Kieran's already met you, she said. Draw your own conclusion. Shush. He didn't sleep. When the camp began to wake, the cook fire sounds, the movement, the low voice noise of packs starting their day, he was already dressed and moving. He spent the morning doing what he was expected to do. The Greenbrook meeting, which he concluded in 14 minutes by agreeing to a boundary survey that resolved the Eastern Corridor question permanently and removed the need for any further conversation about it. A coordination meeting with his escort about the second day's schedule. A brief public appearance at the morning's pack gathering where his presence meant what it always meant. Iron Hollow was here. Iron Hollow was watching. Iron Hollow was something you accounted for in your calculations. He did all of it without error. Underneath it, at a constant low register that he could not shut down no matter how much he wanted to, was a 12-year-old boy dropping one of his best wolves with a patience and technical clarity that had clearly been built over years of deliberate work by someone who was teaching survival and calling it fighting technique. Underneath that was a woman standing in firelight telling him that everything he'd become was built on a lie. Underneath that was Croft, Aldrich Croft, who was currently back in Iron Hollow, who had been back in Iron Hollow running administrative functions since before Ronan even left for the summit, who had 12 years of access to pack records and territorial files and succession documentation and anything else a man in his position could quietly use for purposes that had nothing to do with Iron Hollow's welfare. At midday, Ronan went back to the proving ground. Not because there was an event. There wasn't. The circle was empty, the stacked stone border silent, the compressed earth still showing the marks of yesterday's contests. Kieran was there, sitting on the boundary stones eating something wrapped in cloth, reading from a small book with the focused absorption of someone accustomed to finding space inside activity. He looked up when Ronan approached. Nothing shifted in his posture. Ronan stopped at the edge of the circle. "May I sit?" Kieran looked at him for a moment. "It's public space," he said. Which was an answer, and not an answer, and Ronan sat on the boundary stone 6 feet away and looked at the empty circle. They were quiet for a while. The wind moved through the flats with the low, persistent honesty of Highland wind, purposeful and indifferent. "Your mother told me some things this morning," Ronan said. "I know." Kieran's voice was level. "She told me she talked to you." "She show you the documentation?" "Some of it." A pause. "Enough." Ronan looked at his hands on his knees. The hands that had run a pack for 12 years under a set of operating assumptions that had apparently been installed by a man with a different agenda. Kieran, I'm not ready to have that conversation, Kieran said. Ronan stopped. What I know now, the boy continued, is that there was deception. I know that you were lied to, and that my mother was lied to. I understand that structurally. He turned a page in his book without looking at it. But understanding the mechanism of something is not the same as feeling different about it. You were absent for 12 years. That's not Croft's fault. That's time. That's my life. That's the thing that's real. Ronan said nothing. There was nothing to say that was adequate to that, and he was old enough to know that inadequate responses were worse than silence. My mother spent 12 years building something real, Kieran said. Haven's Ridge is real. The wolves there are real. The life she made, that's not a consolation prize for what she lost. That's what she built. He finally looked at Ronan directly, those eyes again. I'm not going to pretend that finding out you were tricked makes up for the fact that I grew up without a father. No, Ronan said, it doesn't. Kieran watched him, measuring something. But you're not going to run, the boy said. It wasn't a question. No. Why? Ronan met his son's eyes. He thought about the 12-year-old version of the answer, the one he'd have given in the first raw hour after the proving ground. Because you're mine. Because you have my blood. Because I missed something I didn't know existed, and now that I know it, I can't unfeel it. He set that version aside. Because I owe you the truth, Ronan said, and because you deserve a chance to decide what you do with it. Not me deciding for you what our relationship means, not your mother, not Croft, not the pack. He held the gaze. You. Kieran was quiet for a moment. The wind moved. I haven't decided yet, Kieran said. I know. I might decide you're not worth it. You might. And you'd accept that. Ronan's throat was tight with something he'd been trained since boyhood to consider unacceptable. He accepted it now, that tightness, as the only honest thing available to him. Yes, he said. Kieran looked at him for another moment. Then he returned to his book. They sat there, the two of them, in the cold, clear air of the Coldstone Flats while the summit moved around them, packs talking, fires burning, the machinery of alliance and reputation grinding forward. Ronan stayed where he was and didn't try to fill the silence with anything that would have been false. An hour passed. Then Kieran said, without looking up, She taught me tracking, too. Not just fighting. Tracking, resource assessment, shelter construction, medical response. A pause. She said a warrior who can only fight is only useful in one situation. She's right, Ronan said. She usually is. Another silence, different from the first, less cold. The elder who built the deception, Kieran said. Croft. He's still inside your pack? Ronan's jaw tightened. Yes. Kieran turned a page. You're going to go back and deal with that. Yes. He'll have safeguards. A man who constructed something like this will have thought about exposure. He'll have levers, information, alliances, people who owe him. Ronan looked at the boy beside him, at the 12-year-old who had just calmly outlined operational threat assessment like it was a natural continuation of the conversation because apparently Serena Vale had raised a child who thought in survival structures. Yes, Ronan said. He will. Then you'll need to be careful. Kieran glanced at him sideways, brief. Don't let him know you're coming until it's too late for the safeguards to matter. That was my assessment as well. Kieran returned to his book. I'm not helping you because I've decided anything, he said. I'm saying it because Croft is a threat to my mother's operation as much as to yours. Haven's Ridge holds evidence against him. That makes us a target. His voice was level and young and frighteningly clear. If you move against him without accounting for that, it creates a gap he can use against her. Ronan sat with this. With the reality of a boy who had spent 12 years living in a survival-oriented household, doing the math on threats to his mother with the same calm precision he'd shown in the proving ground. I'll protect Haven's Ridge, Ronan said. You have my word. Kieran said nothing. The word of Ronan Ashvale was, evidently, not yet a currency that meant something. That was fair. That was honest. That was exactly what Ronan deserved. They sat in silence for another half hour until Dax appeared at the edge of the proving ground with the expression of a man delivering news that required immediate attention. He looked at Kieran, looked at Ronan, and said nothing about whatever he was thinking. "What?" Ronan said. "Ryder just came in from the eastern approach, fast, from Iron Hollow." Dax's voice was flat in the particular way it got when the news was bad and structural. "Croft left the pack 3 days ago. Reason given was a health visit to a family settlement north of the territory." He paused. "The Pack Council ran a routine records audit after he left. Standard procedure." Ronan was already standing. "They found a secondary correspondence archive," Dax said. "Hidden in the succession vault. Encoded." The Pack archivist broke the first layer. He looked at Ronan with the expression of a man who had delivered bad news before, but not quite this particular flavor of it. "Ronan, he's been in contact with the Stoneback Alpha for 9 years. Not as a diplomatic channel, as an operative." The Stoneback Alpha. Who was here? Whose daughter had performed in the proving ground yesterday? Who had sent his full contingent to the summit? Who was, at this exact moment, somewhere in the Coldstone Flats encampment? Kieran had closed his book. Ronan looked at Dax and felt the specific sensation of a man realizing that the conversation he'd been having was happening inside a trap that had already been sprung. "Where's the Stoneback Alpha right now?" Ronan said. Dax said, "That's the other thing. No one's seen him in 2 hours, and 3 of his wolves are positioned at the only road out of the flats." Ronan moved before Dax finished the sentence. Not fast in the way that was visible. Not the explosive movement of the proving ground. Not something the watching wolves around the encampment could read as alarm. Fast in the internal way, the way a man recalibrates when the ground shifts under him, and survival requires that the recalibration be invisible. He turned, scanned the encampment's layout from memory. 6 hours of presence had been enough to map it. The pavilion positions, the fire rings, the sight lines, the 2 access roads, the footpath that ran along the northern stone ridge that most wolves had used as a scenic walk and Ronan had catalogued as a secondary exit. 3 of Stoneback's wolves on the main road out. That left the ridge path. That left the eastern slope, which was rough terrain and would cost time. That left the possibility that the positioning was a message rather than a trap, a way of saying, "We are here, we are serious, let us talk," and the possibility that it wasn't. Ronan had survived 20 years of alpha politics by treating maybes as yeses until proven otherwise. "Dax," he said quietly, "find Harlan and Voss. Not obviously. No formation, no Iron Hollow positioning, casual. Sug. Harlan and Voss were 2 of his escort wolves, the 2 who had the specific talent for not looking like what they were. I want them between the Stoneback contingent's pavilion and this position within 10 minutes. And the others? Stay visible. Go about the day. Anyone watching Iron Hollow's contingent should see a normal afternoon." Dax nodded once and walked away at a pace that communicated nothing. Ronan looked at Kieran. The boy had stood when Dax delivered the news. He was holding his book at his side, and his face was doing the same thing it had done in the proving ground, processing, calculating, not performing anything. His jaw was set in a way that Ronan's jaw set, and Ronan was not ready to sit with that particular observation right now. "You need to find your mother," Ronan said. "I know where she is." "Then go. Don't run. Walk like you're going somewhere ordinary." He held Kieran's gaze. "Tell her Stoneback. Tell her Croft left Iron Hollow 3 days ago, and Stoneback wolves are on the road. She'll understand the rest." Kieran looked at him for a moment. "What are you going to do?" "Find out what Stoneback actually wants before it becomes a problem I have to solve with my hands instead of my mouth." "And if it's already past the mouth stage?" Ronan said, "Then it's already past the mouth stage and we handle it." The boy's expression shifted slightly. Not reassurance. He wasn't looking for reassurance and Ronan hadn't offered it. Something more specific. An assessment. He was measuring whether Ronan's answer was honest or managed, and he was doing it with a precision that suggested he'd developed the skill over years of necessity. "Go," Ronan said. Kieran went. He walked at the right pace, angled toward the eastern cluster of neutral registration pavilions without urgency, and within 30 seconds, he'd been absorbed into the normal traffic of the encampment. Good instincts. Ronan filed that and moved. The Stoneback Alpha's name was Gareth Vane, 53, built like a man who had once been physically formidable and was now formidable in different ways, the ways that didn't require lifting anything heavier than a decision. He'd run Stoneback for 19 years. Territorial, structured, a reputation for clean alliances and longer memories. Ronan had no specific grievance with him, and no specific trust either. He was, until 40 minutes ago, a quantity that Ronan had simply kept correct accounts on. He found Vane at the edge of the encampment's central gathering area, standing near one of the larger cook fires with two of his senior wolves, and a cup of something hot, and the posture of a man who was precisely where he intended to be. Ronan walked straight to him. No approach angle, no positioning, straight line, full visibility, the kind of movement that said, I am not managing this meeting from the outside. Vane saw him coming and didn't move. That was information. Ashvale, Vane said. Vane. Ronan stopped at a distance that was close enough to be direct and far enough to be controlled. Walk with me. Vane's two senior wolves shifted slightly. Vane's eyes moved over Ronan's face with the particular attention of a man reading a situation he had anticipated. I'm comfortable here, Vane said. I'm sure you are. Ronan let that sit for exactly 1 second. Walk with me anyway. The cook fire crackled. Around them, the central area moved with its normal afternoon population. Wolves eating, talking, the ambient noise of the gathering doing what gatherings did. Nobody close enough to hear a quiet conversation. Vane handed his cup to one of his wolves and walked. They moved toward the northern edge of the encampment, where the noise dropped and the wind came through with more intention. Ronan set the pace and Vane matched it without comment, which meant Vane was comfortable with this trajectory, which meant Vane had thought about this conversation before Ronan initiated it. Your wolves are on the main road, Ronan said. Positioning, Vane said. Routine security during summit gatherings. You know how it is. I know how it is when it's routine. I also know how it is when it isn't. Is there a difference you'd like to identify? Ronan stopped walking. They were at the edge now, the tree line 10 feet ahead, the encampment behind them, just the two of them, and the wind. He turned to face Vane directly. Aldrich Croft, he said. Vane's expression didn't change. That was the tell, not the change, but the absence of it. A man hearing an unexpected name showed something. A man who was expecting the name showed nothing. What about him? Vane said. 9 years, Ronan said. My pack archivist broke the first layer of his correspondence archive 4 hours ago. 9 years of encoded communication between your operation and mine, running through my senior administrative elder. He watched Vane's face. That's a long investment. Vane was quiet for a moment. The wind moved. You're making an accusation, Vane said. I'm making an observation. The accusation depends on what you tell me next. And if I tell you nothing? Then your wolves stay on the road. I spend the rest of this summit making 14 years of Stoneback's boundary requests permanently impossible. And we both go home having accomplished something very specific and very unpleasant. Ronan kept his voice flat. Or you tell me what Croft was doing with your name in his archive, and we have a different conversation. Vane looked at him. The assessment was mutual, and Ronan let it be. He had nothing to hide in his face right now that he wasn't choosing to hide. Croft approached me, Vane said finally. 11 years ago. He had information about a destabilization play inside your territory. A real one, not his. Someone above both of us with designs on the northern corridor. He said he needed a secondary channel, someone outside Iron Hollow who could preserve evidence if things went wrong inside your pack. A pause. He said he was protecting you. Ronan let the silence extend. And you believed that, he said. I believed it was worth keeping a channel open to see where it went. Vane's voice was measured, the voice of a man who had rehearsed his version. What I know now, what my own people have put together from the correspondence fragments, is that the protection story was the first layer. Croft was running a dual account. What he was telling me and what he was actually building inside your structure were not the same operation. What was he building? Succession leverage. He needed Iron Hollow's alpha isolated. without a mate, without an heir, without the political stability that comes from a settled pack lineage. Vane's eyes were direct now, the practiced neutrality giving way to something that had the texture of genuine discomfort. A solitary alpha with no succession line is a pack that can be absorbed or partitioned within one generation. All it takes is time and the right pressure at the right moments. Ronan stood very still. The full shape of it was arriving. Not in pieces anymore. Whole, structural, the way a building's floor plan reveals itself when you finally get the elevation drawing. Serena gone. No heir registered. 12 years of Ronan operating as a singular point of failure, no bond, no succession, no stability that outlasted him personally. And Croft, all that time, inside the records vault, inside the succession protocols, shaping what came in and what went out, and who knew what about the Alpha's personal and political status. "Who does he work for?" Ronan said. "That's what I don't have." Vane's voice carried something that might have been real. "That's what I've been trying to work out for 3 years. The correspondence I have shows Croft as the operational layer. Whatever's above him, I've never seen a name. But you have a shape. I have a direction." Vane looked at him steadily. "It comes from the South, old money, old territories, someone who has been patient for a very long time, and who has been building leverage across multiple packs, not just yours." Multiple packs. The implication spread outward from that phrase, like cracks from a point of impact. "Why are you telling me this?" Ronan said. "Because Croft left Iron Hollow 3 days ago," Vane said, "and my intelligence says he's not going north for a health visit. He's going to Haven's Ridge." Ronan was moving before the sentence completed. Not the controlled pace of before. The full movement, the one he'd spent 20 years being able to produce without warm-up, without announcement. The movement of a man for whom the gap between decision and action had been compressed by necessity to almost nothing. Vane called after him. "Ashvale!" "Get your wolves off the road," Ronan said without turning. "Now, or when this is over, I'll make it a different kind of problem." He didn't wait for the response. He was already cutting through the encampment at the pace that made people step back, the pace that Dax recognized from 40 feet away and was already moving to match. "Serena's location," Ronan said when Dax fell in beside him. "Eastern Pavilions, neutral registration cluster. I had eyes on her 10 minutes ago." "Kieran reached her?" "They were together when I last confirmed, but Ronan—" Dax's voice dropped. "2 of the Stoneback wolves who were on the road. They pulled off the road about 15 minutes ago. My wolf lost them in the tree cover north of the eastern approach." North of the eastern approach, which put them between the main encampment and the neutral registration cluster if you took the fast line through the tree cover. Ronan processed this without breaking stride. "How many total Stoneback wolves unaccounted for?" he said. 4. The 3 from the road and 1 of the senior wolves from Vane's personal detail. "Armed? Everyone at a summit gathering is armed." "Yes," Ronan said. "They are." Boom. The neutral registration cluster was a group of 6 pavilions set apart from the main encampment by a natural depression in the plateau ground. Not a defensive position, but not exposed either. The wolves who operated sanctuaries and welfare outfits and non-territorial packs used this section specifically because it was separated from the main power dynamics by distance and custom. Ronan came in from the south side, the approach that put the pavilions between him and the tree cover to the north. He saw Serena before she saw him. She was standing outside the central pavilion with Kieran beside her and another wolf he didn't recognize, an older female, compact, with the watchful bearing of someone who served as security. Serena had the folder of documents in her hands, and she was in the middle of saying something to Kieran when Ronan's movement caught her attention. Her eyes found him, read his pace. Her body adjusted before she'd processed the why. Good instincts. 12 years of building a survival operation had not softened what she'd always been. "Inside," Ronan said when he was close enough not to raise his voice. "Now, all of you." "What?" "Croft is moving on Haven's Ridge. Stoneback wolves in the tree cover to the north. Inside, Serena." She moved. No debate, no verification request. She read the operational urgency in his face and moved, which was also information, which told him something about what 12 years of building Haven's Ridge had required of her. Inside the pavilion was functional and spare. A work table, cots folded against the wall, supply packs stacked with the organized density of people who knew how to pack for readiness. The older female wolf came in behind them. Kieran closed the pavilion flap. "Talk," Serena said. Ronan gave her the structure of it in 3 minutes. Vane's information, Croft's movement, the 4 stoneback wolves in the tree cover, the southern origin of whoever sat above Croft in the architecture of what had been built. Serena listened without interrupting. Her face during this was a thing Ronan watched in his peripheral vision and refused to look at directly because looking at it directly required bandwidth he needed for other things. When he finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds, which was the specific duration of a person integrating information that confirmed something they had feared rather than something they hadn't considered. "The evidence I have," she said. "The witness statements, the seal verification analysis, it's all here." She held up the folder. "Physical copies. My digital backups are at Havens Ridge itself, on a server that 2 of my wolves are maintaining. Croft knows the physical copies are here. He knew I was filing for neutral status. He would have monitored the registration. Yes." Her jaw was tight. "He can't let this summit end with me presenting these documents to a multi-pack arbitration council." "Which is what you were planning." "Which is what I was planning." Kieran had been listening from the corner of the pavilion with his arms crossed and his back against the canvas wall. Now he said, "So the move on Havens Ridge is a secondary target. The primary target is this location. The documents." Ronan looked at his son. "Yes," he said. "Then the tree cover positioning isn't about blocking movement." Kieran's voice was calm, with the calm of someone running through the logic rather than suppressing the fear. And there was fear in there. Ronan could see it in the set of his shoulders, but it was not in charge. "It's about waiting for the right moment. A summit gathering is public. An incident here, in the middle of 200 wolves from a dozen packs, is bad operational cover. Unless it happens fast and clean enough that there's no witness consensus," Ronan said. "Isolated location, neutral registration cluster, minimal foot traffic, a fire, a theft, an accident that happens before anyone processes what they saw." Serena looked at him. "You've thought about this type of operation before." "I've run this type of territory for 20 years. I know what it looks like from the inside." The pavilion was quiet for a moment. Outside, the general noise of the encampment moved in through the canvas. Distant, normal, indifferent. The older female wolf spoke for the first time. Her name, Ronan would learn later, was Ida. She had the specific economy of movement and speech that came from decades of operational thinking. "We have 3 people in this pavilion and 1 exit. If their positioning is the north tree cover, they'll want to move us out to the east or hold the south approach." "Which means we don't move east," Ronan said. "Or we make them think we're moving east," Kieran said. Everyone looked at him. He looked back at them with the specific expression of someone who has already run the next 2 steps and is waiting for everyone else to catch up. It was a look Ronan recognized from his own mirror, and it produced in his chest a sensation he was going to have to deal with at some point when it was not this particular moment. "The documents need to get to the main gathering area," Kieran said. "Multi-pack, public space. If they reach arbitration council hands in a space with 50 witnesses, Croft's leverage collapses. The move is to get them there before anyone in the tree cover can close the distance." He looked at Serena. "But not the obvious person carrying them. Not you. You're the target." His eyes moved to Ronan. "And not you either. Iron Hollow's Alpha carrying Havens Ridge documents looks like a territorial claim, not an evidence submission." "Then who?" Serena said. Kieran looked at her for a moment. Something passed between them, the specific communication of people who have spent 12 years as each other's primary person. "I'm unenrolled," Kieran said. "No pack affiliation on record. I won the open challenge this morning. Half the summit wolves watched it." A pause. "I'm the last person they're positioning against." Serena said, "No." "Mom? No." Her voice was controlled and absolute. "You are 12 years old, and I am not sending you into—" "I've been training for operational situations since I was 8, Kieran said. "You know that. You built that." He wasn't arguing in the emotional register. He was making a case, clear and direct, the way someone made a case when they'd already done the emotional processing and reached the conclusion. A young wolf walking through the gathering with a folder is invisible. An alpha, or the woman who filed the evidence, is not. Serena looked at Ronan. Ronan understood what the look was asking. She was not asking for permission. She was asking for an honest assessment, because she needed one from someone who could read the operational reality without the filter of 12 years of protective love. She was asking him to be useful in the specific way that she couldn't be right now. He looked at Kieran, at the set of his jaw, the quality of his stillness, the way he'd been running tactical assessment since the moment Dax delivered the news. "He's right about the cover," Ronan said. Serena's jaw tightened. "He's right," Ronan said again quietly, "and I'll be behind him the entire route, visible. If anyone from that tree line moves toward the gathering area, they're moving toward me." A long silence. "If anything happens to him," Serena said, and the sentence didn't finish because it didn't need to. "Nothing will happen to him," Ronan said. It was not the kind of promise that came with guarantees attached. They both knew that. But it was the kind of promise that came from a place below performance, below management, below the 20 years of controlled expression. It came from the part of him that had been doing arithmetic since the proving ground and had arrived at the only calculation that felt true. Serena held his gaze for 3 seconds. Then she held out the folder. Kieran took it. They moved at 2-minute intervals. Kieran first, cutting southeast toward the main gathering area at the pace of someone with somewhere unremarkable to be, the folder tucked under his arm like a competition record. Ida positioned to the west, creating a visual anchor for anyone watching the pavilion. Serena moved north, directly toward the tree cover, which was the move that made no instinctive sense, and therefore the move most likely to disrupt a surveillance position. Nobody expects the target to walk toward the threat. Ronan went last. He moved through the eastern edge of the neutral cluster at a pace that was deliberate and visible, angling to intercept Kieran's route at the midpoint, close enough to cover and far enough not to read his escort. He was 40 feet behind Kieran, the gathering area visible ahead, the noise of the encampment's main population coming up around them when he saw the movement. Not from the north. From the east. A single wolf, not stoneback colors, moving with the specific quality of controlled urgency through the sparse crowd. Mid-40s, unremarkable build, the kind of face that had been designed over a lifetime to be forgotten. He was closing the angle on Kieran with the geometry of someone who had been waiting for exactly this movement. Ronan recognized the geometry the way he recognized any ambush structure, from the inside, because he had deployed it himself, and there was no other way to truly know what it looked like. He moved. Not at a run. A run created attention, created crowd disruption, created the noise that would serve the operation. He moved at the aggressive edge of a walk, cutting the angle hard, calculating that he could close the gap before the other wolf closed his. He was wrong by about 4 seconds. The wolf reached Kieran first. Not with violence, nothing so visible. He came in close, one hand out, and said something that Ronan couldn't hear from the distance. Kieran stopped walking. Ronan arrived. "Step back," he said. He said it at the volume that carried and no further, the volume that communicated the specific authority of a man who would not be saying it twice. The wolf looked at him. He had pale eyes and a stillness that was different from Kieran's stillness. Not the stillness of someone processing, but the stillness of someone waiting for instructions from a source that hadn't spoken yet. "Iron Hollow business," Ronan said. "Step back now." "This doesn't concern Iron Hollow," the wolf said. His accent was southern. Vane had said southern. Kieran's eyes had found Ronan's. In them was the specific quality of someone holding their position and waiting, not frozen, not panicked, waiting. "You're holding a conversation with a 12-year-old in the middle of a public gathering," Ronan said, without pack affiliation, without introduction, with your hand on his arm. He looked at the hand. The wolf released Kieran's arm. "That concerns everyone present." He raised his voice by precisely the increment that would carry to the nearest clusters of wolves without becoming a shout. "Does anyone have a registration for this wolf?" Heads turned. That was the mechanism. Not a fight, not a confrontation in the back of an empty space. Public. Witnessed. the gathering turning its attention toward this specific point like a slow tide. The wolf looked at Ronan with the pale eyes and made a decision that was visible in the shift of his weight before it happened. Then he ran. Not into the crowd, away from it, east, toward the same tree cover that the stoneback wolves had used. 3 seconds, and he was moving with the full speed of a wolf who had dropped the pretense of the unremarkable face. Ronan looked at Kieran. "Are you?" "Fine." Kieran's voice was level. His hand was steady on the folder. He said, "Give me the documents and you walk away." I said nothing. A pause. "Then you arrived." Ronan looked at the direction the wolf had gone. Then at the gathering area, now 20 feet away, where the Arbitration Council's registration table was visible under its official banner. "Go," Ronan said. "Straight there. Don't stop." Kieran went. Ronan watched him cover the distance, 12 years old, his mother's eyes and his bone structure, walking through a crowd of assembled alpha-level wolves, with the bearing of someone who had been told that the world was survivable if you refused to let it tell you otherwise. The folder reached the table. The council archivist looked up, looked at Kieran, looked at the folder, looked at the submission form on top. Ronan's hand was on his knife. Not drawn, just there, the way it was there when a situation had not resolved but had reached a point where the resolution was going to cost something. Behind him he could hear the encampment reorienting, the noise changing texture, the specific shift that happened when something had occurred and the surrounding population was trying to determine whether it required a response. His phone buzzed. Dax. The message read, "Serena found them in the tree cover, all 4. She walked in and sat down between them and started talking. They don't know what to do with her. Despite everything, the knife at his hip, the Southerner running east, the folder finally in the archivist's hands, 12 years of damage that was only now beginning to show its true dimensions, something moved in Ronan's face. He put the phone away. Serena Vale had walked alone into a tree line with 4 positioned wolves and sat down and started talking, because she had apparently spent 12 years building a survival operation, and it had made her the most dangerous kind of person, one who was afraid of nothing she hadn't already survived. The archivist stamped the submission, called for a verification witness. Another council member leaned over. Ronan exhaled slowly through his nose. The documents were filed, which meant Croft's operation had exactly 1 move left, and Croft, wherever he was about to find out that the ground he'd spent 12 years building had just been pulled out from under him in a public space in front of 200 witnesses. Ronan turned east toward the direction the pale-eyed wolf had run, because whatever came next was coming from that direction, and it was coming fast, and this time there was no managed pace, no controlled expression, no version of himself that kept things at the level of conversation. This time it was going to be something else entirely. The pale-eyed wolf ran east and Ronan ran after him, not because catching him was the point. A single operative running from a public space was already a contained problem, already visible, already something the gathering's council security would pick up within minutes. He ran because the pale-eyed wolf was not running away from something. He was running towards something, and the direction was wrong, and the wrongness of it had a specific quality that Ronan's body recognized before his mind had finished the sentence. East was not the tree cover. East was not the road. East was the ridge path, the secondary exit he'd cataloged on arrival, the one most wolves had used as a scenic walk, the one he had mentally filed as an escape route. Someone else had filed it as an entrance. He came over the ridge crest 30 seconds behind the wolf and stopped. Below him, the path descended into the narrow channel between the ridge and the plateau's eastern face. 3 wolves on the path. Not stoneback colors, no colors at all, traveling clothes, the kind of nondescript that was its own statement. The pale-eyed wolf reached them and stopped running and turned to face the ridge, which meant he'd known Ronan was behind him, which meant the run had been the lead. Ronan had been herded. The realization arrived with the cold clarity of a man who had just recognized the shape of the trap from inside it. Every operational instinct in him went very quiet and very focused. The wolf in the center of the 3 was Aldrich Croft, 61 years old. Croft had always looked like the kind of man who appeared in the background of important decisions. Medium height, unremarkable build, gray at the temples, and in the neat trim of his beard. He had served Iron Hollow since before Ronan's alpha claim. He had been in the room when Ronan was confirmed. He had managed succession protocols, territorial records, administrative archives, the institutional memory of a pack that had trusted him completely because he had spent decades making himself the kind of man that packs trusted completely. He stood on the path below the ridge and looked up at Ronan with an expression that was, and this was the thing that landed hardest, harder than the trap itself, not triumphant, not afraid. It was the expression of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down, almost like relief. Alpha Ashvale, Croft said. Ronan came down the ridge path. He didn't run. Whatever was about to happen was going to happen in the register of men, not wolves, and he needed every part of himself that was controlled and cold and capable of hearing things without destroying them before the information was complete. He stopped 10 feet from Croft. The three other wolves flanked, not aggressive positioning, watchful positioning, the kind that said this conversation is happening and we are here to make sure it completes. You left without filing departure documentation, Ronan said. It was the wrong thing to say, and the right thing to say simultaneously. Wrong, because it was procedural in a moment that had nothing to do with procedure. Right, because it established that Ronan was still the alpha, still the institutional authority, still the man whose framework defined what was normal and what was a deviation from it. Croft's expression didn't change. I left because the summit created a window, he said. I needed to use the window. To do what? To finish what I started 12 years ago. He said it without embellishment, without theater, and to have this conversation before it could be managed by anyone else. Ronan stood in the cold air of the ridge channel and looked at the man who had served him, who had built the architecture of his isolation, who had constructed two false narratives with the precision of someone who understood that the strongest cage was one the prisoner built themselves. Say it, Ronan said. Croft looked at him for a moment. Then, I work for Aldrin Voss. The name hit the air and stayed there. Aldrin Voss. The Southern Territories patriarch, the man who had inherited 3 pack-adjacent land holdings and spent 30 years quietly converting them into something that wasn't quite a pack and wasn't quite a corporation, and had a reach that most northern wolves deliberately didn't look at directly because looking at it directly required decisions about what you were going to do about it. How long? Ronan said. I was recruited before your father died. Croft's voice was even. This was a man making a confession that he had decided to make, not under pressure, not broken open. Decided. The Northern Corridor has been Voss's long-term acquisition target for 20 years. Iron Hollow is the keystone. Take Iron Hollow's stability, fragment the Northern alliances, and the corridor opens. And you built the conditions for that from the inside. I removed the conditions that prevented it. Your bond with Serena Vale was, he paused, chosen word, a stabilizing element that needed to be separated. A bonded alpha with a secured succession line is a 40-year project. A solitary alpha with no heir is a single-generation window. The clinical precision of it, not said with cruelty, said with the exhausted accuracy of a man describing a structural problem he had solved. Ronan stood in the channel and felt the temperature of his own rage drop from hot to something far more dangerous, cold, specific, capable of patience. You told her I wanted the child dead, Ronan said. Yes. And you told me she had rejected the bond. Yes. And for 12 years you sat in my pack, in my council, in my succession vault. Yes. Croft looked at him without flinching. I watched you become exactly what the isolation required. The alpha who needed no one. The man who had sealed every human entrance point. You were... Something moved in his face then, the first thing that wasn't controlled. Effective at it. More effective than Voss anticipated. You didn't fracture. You hardened. That created a different kind of problem. Ronan was quiet for a moment. The ridge channel was private in the way of spaces that geography makes private. The encampment noise barely reached here. The wind took most of what was said. Why are you telling me this? Ronan said. Croft was quiet for 3 seconds. Then, because I went to Haven's Ridge. Ronan's hands closed. I went 3 days ago, Croft said, before the summit. I told myself I was managing the exposure risk. Serena Vale had been building her evidence for months. I knew the submission was coming. I needed to assess how much she actually had. A pause. She wasn't there, but I saw the operation. I saw what she built. His voice was doing something around the edges now, something that was not quite steady. There are children there, Ashvale. Displaced pups, some of them not more than 4 or 5 years old. She built... He stopped, pressed his mouth flat. She built something that required a level of dedication that I had told myself she was incapable of. The narrative I constructed required her to be a woman who ran. She isn't. She never was. The silence in the channel was complete. 12 years ago, I separated a man from a woman who was carrying his child, Croft said. I told myself it was operational necessity. I told myself the pack-level consequences justified it. He looked at Ronan directly, and in his face was the thing that distinguished a confession made to a court from a confession made to the person you had wronged. It was not asking for anything. It was simply transferring the weight to the person it belonged to. I was wrong, not strategically, morally. Ronan heard this. He heard it, and the cold rage in him did not dissipate because someone had admitted wrongdoing. Rage didn't work that way, and anyone who had lived past 30 in a position of real consequence knew that apologies were not payments, they were acknowledgments of debt. The debt remained. But underneath the rage was something that had been sitting under everything for 12 years, load-bearing and unnamed. The question that had no good answer under the original architecture: why would she leave? Why would she take his child and vanish without a single word? Why would someone who was Serena be capable of that? The answer had always been that she wasn't. He had known that and buried it beneath the version that let him keep functioning. Voss? Ronan said. Where is he now? Croft said. That's why I came to the summit. The information Croft delivered in the next 10 minutes had the quality of a building being disassembled, each piece structural, each removal making the remaining structure less stable. Aldrin Voss had been patient, 20 years of patience, operating below the visibility threshold of the northern packs, building leverage through administrative channels rather than territorial ones. Croft had not been his only operative inside Iron Hollow, but he had been the primary one. The others, 3 wolves in secondary positions, none of them council level, all of them handling specific information streams, had been maintained as redundancy. The Stoneback involvement was lateral, not hierarchical. Vane had been telling the truth, which Ronan filed with the cold efficiency of someone updating a map mid-operation. Vane was not Voss's wolf. He was a separate opportunist who had been fed selective information by Croft and had made his own calculations, none of which had required full knowledge of the underlying structure. The pale-eyed wolf was Voss's, not Vane's, which explained why he'd been positioned independently. Voss himself was in the southern approach corridor, 3 hours' ride from Coldstone. He had not come to the summit because he had not needed to, until now. The document submission had changed the calculation. Whatever move he was going to make, it would come in the next 12 hours. What does he have left? Ronan said. Inside Iron Hollow? The 3 secondary operatives. They have access to the succession vault, the territorial boundary records, and the pack emergency protocols. Croft's voice was precise. The protocols include a provision that allows a senior administrative elder, my position, to call a provisional leadership review in the event that an alpha is determined to be operating under compromised judgment. Ronan went still. The standard for compromised judgment, Croft continued, in the Iron Hollow Charter that I helped draft 14 years ago, requires the testimony of 2 senior wolves and a council elder. The 3 operatives are senior wolves by rank. I am the council elder. He paused. If I return to Iron Hollow under Voss's direction, the provisional review can be called within 24 hours of my arrival. Your title goes into suspension. The pack goes into administrative oversight. Under who? Under whoever the provisional council names. The provision was drafted to name an interim from the established succession line. A beat. You have no succession line. The provision defaults to the senior administrative elder. To Croft himself. Who reported to Voss? 20 years. The patience of it, the structural depth of it, Not a territorial grab, a legal mechanism built from inside Iron Hollow's own charter, designed to produce an outcome that looked like institutional process and was actually a transfer of control to a Southern operator who had never fired a single shot. Ronan stood in the ridge channel and felt the ground of the last 20 years of his life shift under him in a way that was different from anything a physical threat had ever produced. A physical threat you could face and break or be broken by. This was different. This was the discovery that the ground itself had been hollow. Every instinct he had developed over 2 decades of running a pack, the ruthlessness, the isolation, the comprehensive self-sufficiency, had been the product of a manufactured wound. He had built himself into something that served an enemy's design, and the architecture of that enemy's design was now sitting inside Iron Hollow's charter, waiting for Croft to come home. He looked at Croft. "You drafted the provision," he said. "Yes. And you're telling me how to stop it." "I'm telling you what exists." Croft held his gaze. "What you do with it is your business." "You understand," Ronan said, "that this conversation doesn't clear your account." "I know that." "You understand that when this is finished, you will face full arbitration, every operative, every decision, every document, public record." "Yes." "No hesitation." "That's appropriate." Ronan looked at him for another moment. Then he said, "The 3 operatives inside Iron Hollow. Names." Croft gave them. Ronan turned and went back up the ridge. Ian. He was moving through the encampment before the full operational picture had finished assembling, because the full operational picture was going to keep assembling whether he moved or not, and standing still was not a position available to him. Dax met him at the northern edge of the neutral cluster. "Serena," Ronan said. "Out of the tree cover. She's back." "Ronan, what?" "Get the escort. Not a formation. Individual positions, circular coverage, converging on the neutral cluster from different directions. Nobody moves together." He was already walking. "I need a communication line to Iron Hollow's Pack Council. Secure channel, not through the summit's communication relay. That'll take 20 minutes to set up independently." "Then start it now." Dax was already moving. Ronan covered the remaining distance to the neutral cluster's central pavilion and pushed through the flap. Serena was there, Kieran beside her, Ida at the back of the space. The atmosphere inside had the texture of people who had been through 2 hours of operational tension and were running on the compound alertness of unresolved threat. Serena looked at him when he came in. Read his face. "Croft," she said. "Croft." He pulled the camp chair from the work table and sat in a way that was not casual, deliberate, a man sitting because the conversation required full cognitive presence, rather than the energy cost of standing. He's flipped, voluntarily. He came to the summit to deliver the operational structure. He told her. All of it. Voss, the timeline, the 3 operatives, the charter provision. He said it clean and complete the way he briefed military intelligence. No editorializing, the facts in order. She listened the way she'd listened that morning, still, integrating, her face doing the work of someone receiving information that confirmed the worst version of what she'd suspected. When he finished, she was quiet. Then she said, "The charter provision. To void it, you need what?" "The provision requires the testimony of 2 senior wolves and a council elder. If I can remove the 3 operatives from their positions before Croft physically returns to Iron Hollow, the senior wolf testimony condition can't be met. The provision fails." He paused. "I also need to amend the charter. The default succession clause that names the administrative elder as interim, that clause needs to be struck. It requires an alpha signature and a council majority." "How many council members do you have who aren't compromised?" 7 of 9, based on Croft's information. He was specific about who his people were. 7 of 9 is your majority. She looked at him. "Can you reach them before Voss moves?" "I'm setting up a secure line now. If I can reach Councillor Hewitt, she's senior counsel. She can call an emergency amendment session remotely with appropriate witness documentation." Kieran, who had been listening from his position against the wall with the by now familiar quality of someone running parallel calculations, said, "What about the 3 operatives? You can remove them from their positions, but removal alone doesn't neutralize them. They still have existing access to the vault. Ronan looked at his son. Vault access is locked by Alpha Signature Protocol in the event of a security review, Ronan said. If I initiate a security review remotely, through Hewitt, using the emergency provisions, vault access locks within 6 hours. 6 hours, Kieran said. How far is Iron Hollow from here? 4.5 hours at full pace. The math was immediate, and everyone in the pavilion did it simultaneously. If Voss had a messenger already in motion toward Iron Hollow, which, given that the document submission had been public and visible, and would have reached any watcher within the encampment within minutes, then the 3 operatives inside the pack would know the submission had been made and Croft hadn't returned by now, which meant they might move before being told to. Serena said it first. They don't need Croft to call the review. They need 2 senior wolves and a council elder. Croft is the council elder, and he's here, not there. But if they can reach any other council member before the vault locks, Councillor Marsh, Ronan said. The name arrived from a place he didn't want it to arrive from. He's been Croft's administrative ally for 6 years. I never had cause to question the alliance. He stopped. The sentence completed itself without his help. The structural instinct to protect what was his shaping itself into something that had nothing to do with territory. He had been wrong about Marsh. He had been wrong about Croft. He had been wrong about the ground he was standing on for 12 years. The operational certainty that had been his primary working tool for 2 decades was now contaminated at the source. Every judgment he'd made inside an information environment that one man had been corrupting, and every configuration of loyalty and trust inside Iron Hollow was now a question mark until proven otherwise. A man could not function in that condition. A man could not run a pack, protect what mattered, make the decisions that needed to be made right now with a 12-hour window, if every piece of information from his own structure was suspect. The thing that broke open in Ronan's chest in that moment was not grief and not rage. It was something quieter and more complete. The recognition that the version of himself he had built to survive the last 12 years was built on contaminated ground, and that surviving the next 12 hours required something that version of himself was not equipped to provide. He could not do this alone. He had been doing it alone because Croft had built conditions that made isolation seem like strength. Those conditions were now visible, which meant the isolation was now visible, which meant the thing he defended as independence was actually the cage, and the cage was currently being used against him by the man who'd built it. He looked at Serena. She was looking at him. Not with softness. Softness was not the available register, and she was not the kind of woman who deployed it as management. She was looking at him with the specific attention of someone who had spent 12 years building a survival operation that ran on the exact opposite principle of everything Ronan had built. Not a singular point of control, but distributed trust, multiple people with real capability and real access and real stakes in each other's survival. I need help, Ronan said. 3 words. In 20 years of alpha leadership, he had not said them in that sequence without an immediate qualifier. I need help with the eastern boundary. I need help with the succession filing. I need help that is tactical and limited and does not require me to be anything other than what I have made myself. This time there was no qualifier. Serena looked at him for a moment. Then she turned to Ida. Get the satellite unit from the supply pack. He needs a clean communication line. To Kieran, the document submission. You watched the council archivist. Was the receipt logged in the public record or just internal? Public record, Kieran said. The verification witness signed the public log. It's already distributed. Then Voss can't suppress it. The evidence is in circulation regardless of what his operatives do inside Iron Hollow. She turned back to Ronan. You have the communication line and the public record. What you need is to reach Hewitt before Marsh does. Hewitt doesn't have a secure mobile line. She's traditional. She runs her communication through the PAC's relay station, which is controlled by the standard operations staff, not compromised, according to Croft. He paused. According to Croft. The contamination problem again. Every answer from Croft's testimony was simultaneously the best information available and an information source whose reliability was compromised by the fact of what he was. A man who built deceptions for 20 years and then decided to stop building them was not a clean source. He might be honest now. He might be running a second layer. There was no way to know, and the only operational decision available was to treat his information as directionally useful and structurally suspect simultaneously, which was an exhausting way to move through the next 12 hours. Ida came back with the satellite unit. Ronan took it, ran the startup sequence, got a connection. He pulled Counselor Hewitt's direct contact from memory, one of 200 numbers he had stored without device assistance because he had always maintained the practice of keeping critical contacts in his head rather than in systems that other people could access. The line rang, once, twice. On the third ring, a voice Ronan recognized answered with the clipped precision of a 70-year-old woman who did not waste words on hellos. "Ashvale," Hewitt said, "I've been waiting for you to call since I saw that submission get logged this morning." Ronan exhaled one short breath through his nose. "Hewitt, I need an emergency amendment session, succession clause, Charter Section 14, subsection 3, and I need you to lock the vault." A pause. In it, Ronan heard the specific quality of Hewitt's assessment. The woman had been counsel since before his father's time, and she had a mind like a territorial survey, comprehensive and precise. "Marsh called me 40 minutes ago," Hewitt said. Ronan's hand tightened on the satellite unit. "He told me you were operating under external influence," Hewitt continued, "and that the summit documents were submitted under duress by a wolf with a personal grievance against Iron Hollow's leadership. He requested I hold any amendment session pending his arrival at the pack for a full council review." Another pause. He was very specific about the timeline. He said he needed 48 hours. 48 hours. Enough time for Croft to return, or for Voss to position his own people, or for the provisional review mechanism to be triggered under circumstances that would look, from the outside, like legitimate institutional process. "Hewitt," Ronan said, "I'm going to tell you something and I need you to hear it without the frame that Marsh gave you." "I'm listening," she said. "I've been listening to this pack for 40 years. I know the difference between an alpha operating under influence and an alpha who just found out the floor was rotten. Talk." Ronan talked. He gave her Croft. He gave her Voss. He gave her the charter provision, the 3 operatives, the 9-year Stoneback correspondence, the construction of the deception that had removed Serena and produced 12 years of deliberate isolation. He gave her the names of the 3 operatives. When he finished, there was a silence on the line. Then Hewitt said, "One of those names is my nephew's pack brother." Ronan said nothing. "He's been stationed in vault operations for 4 years, Hewitt said. Her voice had the quality of a woman receiving information that required reconstruction of a landscape she had thought she knew. "I placed him there. I recommended him." "I know," Ronan said. "Croft gave me the placement record. Your recommendation was used as cover. You were not aware." Another silence. Longer. "I need an hour," Hewitt said finally, "to verify the 3 operative positions independently. If your information holds, I can call the amendment session and the vault lock simultaneously. I have 2 other council members I trust without qualification. They'll serve as the session witnesses." "An hour," Ronan said. "Hewitt, Marsh is moving." "I know he's moving. An hour, Ashvale. Some of us verify before we act." A pause that had the texture of 40 years of institutional knowledge behind it. That might be a lesson worth keeping. The line held for a moment. Then quietly she said, "The woman who filed the documents. Serena Vale. Is she there with you?" Ronan looked at Serena, who was watching him from across the pavilion. "Yes," he said. "Good," Hewitt said. "Tell her I'm sorry it took this long for someone inside Iron Hollow to say that." The line went quiet, not disconnected, just waiting. Hewitt already moving through her own operational sequence. Ronan held the satellite unit and stared at the pavilion wall and breathed through the specific sensation of a man who had spent an hour learning that everything he'd built was constructed on a lie, and who now had approximately 55 minutes before the lie's architect made his next move. Outside the pavilion, somewhere in the Cold Stone encampment, Voss's pale-eyed wolf was either running south with a message or he wasn't. Marsh was either already inside Iron Hollow's communication relay or he was 40 minutes from it. The vault either still had its standard access protocols or it didn't, and Croft was still on the ridge waiting to find out what kind of man Ronan Ashvale actually was when the cage was finally visible. Ronan put the satellite unit on the table. 55 minutes, he said. Serena looked at him steadily. Then we used them. But before anyone moved, before the next step in the sequence could begin, Dax came through the pavilion flap with a look on his face that Ronan had seen exactly twice in 20 years of shared history. The look of a man who has just received information that changes the shape of every other piece of information that came before it. Ronan, Dax said, Voss isn't 3 hours south. He held out his own communication device. On the screen was a location ping from Iron Hollow's border sensor network, the automated system that logged territorial approach signatures, maintained as standard operational protocol, running continuously and independently of any human oversight. The ping had logged 40 minutes ago. Aldrin Voss was already inside Iron Hollow's territory, and he hadn't come alone. The location ping on Dax's screen was 40 minutes old, which meant Voss had been inside Iron Hollow's territory for 40 minutes before anyone at the summit knew about it, which meant the 3 hours south information from Croft had been either a deliberate misdirection or a position that was already 40 minutes stale when Croft gave it, which amounted to the same thing. Either Croft had lied in the final moment of his confession, or Voss had moved before Croft expected him to move, which meant Voss didn't trust Croft's timeline either. A man who ran operatives for 20 years and didn't trust his own operatives' timelines was a man who had accounted for the possibility of defection, which meant Voss had a contingency that didn't require Croft to come home. Ronan put all of this together in approximately 4 seconds and said, "How many signature reads on the border sensor?" Dax looked at the screen. The sensor logs a pack weight entry, 12 wolves minimum. Could be more if they traveled tight formation. The sensors count by pressure distribution, not individual signatures. 12 minimum. Moving through Iron Hollow's territorial border 40 minutes ago, headed toward a pack whose vault was still open, whose 3 compromised operatives were in position, and whose alpha was 4.5 hours away at full pace. Hewitt had an hour to verify and call the amendment session. The vault lock would take 6 hours from authorization. Voss was already inside the wire. Ronan handed the satellite unit to Serena. "Get Hewitt back on the line. Tell her the timeline has collapsed. She doesn't have an hour. She has 20 minutes. Vault lock is the priority over everything else, including verification. She locks the vault now, or there's nothing left to protect." Serena took the unit and was already dialing. Ronan looked at Dax. "The escort. Full assembly. Armed. Meet at the eastern pavilion edge in 5 minutes. We're moving." 4.5 hours, Ronan. 3 hours and 40 minutes at the pace I'm setting. He looked at Dax with an expression that ended the conversation about pace. 5 minutes. Dax went. Kieran was standing at the work table with the quality of stillness he deployed when he was running calculations he hadn't finished yet. He looked at Ronan. "You're riding back to Iron Hollow," he said. "Yes." "Voss has a 12-wolf minimum entry force and an unknown number of operatives already in position. You have 6 escort wolves in whatever state your pack council is in." He was not arguing, he was inventorying. "Those numbers are wrong." "I know they're wrong." "Then you need more wolves." Ronan looked at him. "I know that too." He turned and went back out through the pavilion flap, across the neutral cluster ground, and toward the main encampment. He moved at the pace that made people step back, and he was counting in his head, not the pace count, not the distance to Iron Hollow. He was counting favors, obligations, the specific ledger of 2 decades of territorial politics. The alliances he'd maintained, the disputes he'd resolved fairly, the summit commitments he'd honored even when honoring them had cost him something. He had been an isolated alpha. He had sealed the human entrances. He had run Iron Hollow as a singular point of control because a man with a manufactured wound will build walls that match the size of what he believes attacked him. But he had also been a fair alpha. Not warm, not community-minded in the way some packs were, but scrupulously fair in the transactional way that territorial politics required. And fairness, over 20 years, had generated something that was not loyalty, but was adjacent to it. A network of packs who did not love Iron Hollow, but who respected the integrity of its alpha's word. He was about to find out what that was worth. He found Gareth Vane at the Stoneback Pavilion, which was where Vane had returned after Ronan had told him to get his wolves off the road. Vane's 2 senior wolves were outside. They saw Ronan coming, and one of them moved to intercept. Ronan walked through the intercept like it wasn't there. Vane was inside, At a folding table with maps and a communication device that he set down when Ronan came through the entrance. Voss is in my territory, Ronan said. He entered 40 minutes ago with a minimum 12 wolf force. My pack council is partially compromised, and my senior administrative elder is sitting on a ridge 200 yards from here, waiting to find out if I'm going to have him executed. He stood in the entrance and looked at Vane directly. I need wolves. Vane was quiet. I know what I'm asking, Ronan said. I know what it costs you to move against Voss publicly. I know he has reach into the Southern Territories, and that reach includes people who can make Stoneback's next 5 years difficult. He didn't move from the entrance. I'm asking anyway. Vane looked at him for a long moment. The experienced, careful, territorial alpha who had spent 19 years keeping Stoneback intact by making smart calculations about which fights were his to fight. You're asking me to commit Stoneback wolves to a territorial incursion against an opponent whose full capacity I don't know, Vane said, on 4 hours' notice based on the testimony of an operative who just flipped. Yes. That's a bad operational position, Ashvale. Yes, it is. Another moment. Vane's hands were flat on the table, the posture of a man thinking rather than stalling. My daughter watched that boy drop your wolf in the proving ground yesterday, Vane said. She talked about it for 2 hours last night, kept saying she'd never seen patience like that in someone his age. He looked at Ronan. He's yours. It was not a question. Yes, Ronan said. Vane stood. I can give you 8 wolves, my best 8. I ride with them. Ronan held his gaze. Vane, Voss has been building leverage across multiple packs, not just yours. I told you that myself. His voice was flat and certain in the way of a man who had made the calculation and was done with the process of making it. If he takes Iron Hollow, the corridor opens, and the next thing he picks up is the first pack in his path. That's not a problem I can wait out. He picked up his communication device. Give me 10 minutes. Bus him. They rode out of Coldstone Flats at a pace that ate ground. Ronan at the front with Dax on his left and Vane on his right. Behind them 6 Iron Hollow escort wolves and 8 Stoneback wolves in the configuration Vane had assembled. Experienced territorial fighters, not young wolves looking to build reputation, but mature wolves who had fought for real stakes and knew the difference between the two. 17 wolves total, against 12 minimum and an unknown number of interior operatives. The math was still wrong. Ronan ran it at intervals between communication calls on the satellite unit, and it was still wrong at every interval. But wrong math was the condition available, and he rode inside it because the alternative was standing still while Voss consolidated a position inside his pack's territory, and standing still was not a position Ronan Ashvale had ever been equipped for. Hewitt called back 20 minutes out from Coldstone. Vault is locked, she said. Her voice was steady with the steadiness of a woman who had just made a significant decision quickly and was carrying the weight of it cleanly. Authorization executed 12 minutes ago. The lock propagates through the system within the hour. The 3 operatives will find their vault access terminated when they next attempt entry. Amendment session? Called. 2 witness counselors confirmed. We're convening remotely in 2 hours. A pause. Marsh attempted to reach me twice in the last 30 minutes. I didn't answer. Good. Ashvale. Her voice shifted slightly, not softer, just more direct. Voss entered your territory with force. Whatever he finds when he gets to the pack center, he's not going to find an open vault or a cooperative administrative elder. He's going to find a pack that doesn't know why a southern operator is walking through their territory with 12 armed wolves. Another pause. Your pack wolves, the ones who aren't compromised, they don't know what's happening. They're going to react. She was right. The pack wolves at Iron Hollow's center, the non-council, non-administrative wolves, the territorial guards and the residential families and the operational staff, they had no context for a 12-plus wolf incursion from the south. They would see a threat. They would respond to a threat the way wolves responded to territorial threats. And they would be outnumbered. I need a communication line to Pack Center, Ronan said. Standard emergency frequency. That runs through the relay station, which Marsh has access to, yes. Ronan's jaw was tight. Is there a secondary line, something not in the standard infrastructure? A brief silence. Then Hewitt said, Counselor Bryn maintains a private communication relay at her residence. She's 2 kilometers from Pack Center. She's trustworthy. I've known her 30 years. Get me her direct contact. Hewitt gave it. Ronan switched lines and reached Bryn, a compact, precise woman who asked 2 questions, got 2 answers, and said she'd have a line to Pack Center security in 8 minutes. 8 minutes at the current pace was approximately 20 kilometers of ground. Ronan kept riding. The communication came through with 6 minutes to spare. The Pack Center security lead was a wolf named Cole, who had been Iron Hollow's head of territorial security for 7 years. Ronan had hired him because Cole was the kind of man who didn't require extensive direction once he understood the objective. He was a finisher, methodical, capable of independent decision-making within a defined operational frame. Cole, Ronan said on the line, 12 wolves entering from the south. Not authorized. Do not engage directly. I need them contained, not broken. Can you do that? Cole's voice was the voice of a man who had been watching the southern approach for the last 30 minutes with no context and now had context. I can do that. I've got 14 wolves at center, another 6 at the eastern perimeter, who can redirect in 20 minutes. 20 wolves against 12 minimum. Use the terrain. The southern approach comes through the narrows east of the ridge. They'll be channeled there. Single file for about 200 meters. I know the narrows. A pause. Ronan? 2 of my perimeter wolves haven't reported in the last hour. Lendis and Harrow. Lendis and Harrow. Ronan ran their names against Croft's list. Neither was on it, which meant either they were compromised in a way Croft hadn't known about, or Voss had moved against them directly. Treat them as compromised until I can confirm otherwise, Ronan said. Don't move to their positions. Understood. Cole's voice was flat and professional. ETA? 2 hours 40 minutes. We'll hold the narrows. A brief pause that had the texture of a man saying something he wouldn't ordinarily say. Ride fast. Pursuit. The terrain of the northern approach to Iron Hollow was Ronan's territory in the literal sense, and in the deeper sense that mattered more. He knew every grade change, every sightline obstruction, every place the wind moved differently because the topography channeled it. He had ridden this ground in every season and every condition for 20 years. He knew where the footing was uncertain after rain and where it held under heavy load and where the tree cover was dense enough to move through without visible silhouette against the skyline. He knew where to push the pace and where to save the horses for what was coming at the end. 2 hours 20 minutes out from Coldstone, Dax came up on his left with the communication device showing a new sensor ping. Second entry, Dax said. Eastern perimeter this time. Smaller, 4 or 5 signatures. Eastern perimeter. Flanking approach, time to arrive in coordination with the southern entry. Classic 2-vector containment. The southern force drove pack wolves toward the eastern perimeter, and the eastern force closed the net. Voss had planned for resistance. Split the formation, Ronan said. Vane, I need 4 of your wolves on the eastern intercept. Fast approach, cut through the Millhaven Fork. They can beat Voss's eastern entry by 20 minutes if they move now. Vane didn't hesitate. He turned and designated 4 wolves by name from his contingent, gave the route in 6 words, and they peeled off immediately at a pace that said Vane had indeed sent his best. 13 wolves remaining on the main approach, against a southern entry force whose exact number was still 12 minimum, still wrong math, still the only math available. Ronan had stopped doing the arithmetic and started doing something else. Not calculation, but a kind of settling, the specific internal process of a man stripping away everything that wasn't essential to the next 2 hours. 12 years of isolation had made him many things, most of them in service of an enemy's design. But it had also given him this, the ability to compress to a single operational point when compression was what the moment required. No regret, no grief, no accounting for the past. Just the ground ahead and what it was going to cost to take it. Serena was somewhere behind him. She had not accepted his suggestion that she remain at Coldstone. She had in fact told him something specific about that suggestion that he would not repeat in present company, and she and Ida had joined the formation at the Millhaven Crossroads with 2 additional Havens Ridge wolves, who had apparently been staged there as standard operational security for summit travel. He had not argued. Partly because she was right that Haven's Ridge was also a target and Cole's wolves couldn't split coverage indefinitely. Partly because watching her tell him where he could put his suggestion had produced, despite everything, a sensation in his chest that he identified after a moment as the feeling of being known by someone who was not afraid of him. That was a foreign sensation. It was not, he was discovering, an unwelcome one. Kieran had not come. Ronan had looked back when Serena joined the formation and found only Serena and Ida and the two Haven's Ridge wolves. He'd asked. Serena had said, "He's not here." Said it in a tone that meant she knew where he was and had decided not to tell Ronan, which meant Kieran had made a choice that his mother thought Ronan would attempt to override. He filed that. There were too many other things requiring immediate attention. They came through the northern approach to Iron Hollow territory with 40 minutes of riding still ahead when Ronan heard the first sounds of the containment engagement. Not close, 2 kilometers south, carried on the highland wind with the distorted clarity of sound over open terrain. The specific quality of a disciplined engagement, not the chaotic noise of an ambush, but the controlled, intermittent sounds of a force being channeled and held rather than routed. Cole was holding the Narrows. Ronan pushed the pace for the final stretch. They came in from the north and hit the pack center from above, the high approach, which gave sight lines across the main residential and operational structures to the Narrows engagement 200 meters south. Ronan took in the layout in the first 3 seconds. Cole's wolves in 2 lines across the Narrows channel, holding formation, the southern force pressing but not breaking through, the containment solid but stressed at the right flank, where the numbers were thin. He didn't stop moving. "Right flank," he said to Dax, and Dax understood and took 4 wolves south at an angle to reinforce the thin point before the formation bent. Ronan went straight through the pack center, through the operational buildings, toward the Narrows, because the containment was solid, and what it needed was not more wolves at the perimeter, but resolution at the source. And resolution meant finding Voss inside the configuration, because Voss would be inside it. He would not have sent 12 wolves into a territorial entry without coming himself. A man who had been patient for 20 years did not outsource the moment his patience was supposed to pay off. He was right. Voss was at the rear of the southern force, not hiding, not managing from distance, standing in the Narrows channel 40 meters behind his lead wolves, with 2 personal guards flanking him and the particular bearing of a man watching a plan execute and calculating where it was deviating from specification. He was taller than Ronan had expected. 60-something, silver-haired, the kind of physical build that had been impressive 30 years ago and now carried itself with the authority of a man who hadn't needed to be physically impressive for a long time. He wore traveling clothes that were expensive in a way that was designed not to look expensive. His face was the face of someone who had spent decades making long-term decisions and was accustomed to the sensation of being right. He saw Ronan coming. He did not run. Ronan came through the edge of the engagement, Cole's wolves opening a path without being asked, because Cole was the kind of security lead who read the geometry of a situation in real time, and stopped 15 feet from Voss. The 2 personal guards moved. Ronan looked at them once. They stopped. Not because of anything Ronan did. No display, no threat production. They stopped because there was something in the way he stood that communicated a specific message to anyone with the instinct to receive it. This man has already decided, and what remains is only the execution of that decision, and placing yourself between the decision and its execution is a terminal error in judgment. Voss looked at Ronan with the expression he'd expected: assessment, recalculation, the face of a man updating his operational picture. Not afraid, not performing confidence either, just thinking. "Ashvale," Voss said. "You're inside my territory," Ronan said, "with force, without authorization." "I'm here to facilitate a governance review," Voss said. "The Iron Hollow Charter provides—" "The vault is locked," Ronan said. "The Charter Amendment is in session. Your 3 operatives inside this pack are being removed from their positions as of 20 minutes ago." He watched Voss's face. "The governance review mechanism requires a council elder. Croft is at Coldstone under voluntary detainment. You have no council elder, no vault access, and no operational infrastructure inside this pack. A silence. Around them, the engagement noise had dropped. Cole's wolves holding position, Voss's force recognizing the change in the configuration's center of gravity. When the two principals stopped and faced each other, the surrounding forces always knew what it meant. It meant this was resolving through the principals now. You move faster than I expected, Voss said. Not an admission, an observation, the professional acknowledgement of a man who could appreciate the operational quality of what had just been done to him. You built the conditions that made me slow, Ronan said. 12 years of isolation, no partner, no succession, no distributed trust. You needed me to be a single point of failure. He felt the cold clarity of the last 3 hours settling into something final. You didn't account for what I'd do when I found out the floor was rotten. And what's that? Ask for help. Voss looked at him. Something moved in the experienced face. Not quite surprise, more like the specific expression of a man who had run an accurate character assessment for 20 years and just discovered one variable had been wrong. I have legal standing, Voss said. The document submission is public record, but the claims it contains are still subject to arbitration. This entry was within the procedural frame of Gareth, Ronan said. Vane came up on Ronan's left. He had been there for 30 seconds, which Ronan had known and Voss had apparently not noticed until now. Voss looked at Vane. The assessment recalculated again, visibly. Stoneback is in my territory standing next to me, Ronan said, which means your northern corridor play is over. The corridor requires Iron Hollow. Iron Hollow is not available, and the man who built your operational infrastructure inside my pack is currently sitting on a ridge at Coldstone dictating a full testimony to a multi-pack arbitration council. Voss was quiet. Ronan took one step forward. The guards didn't move this time. They'd already made their assessment. Order your wolves to stand down, Ronan said. It was not loud. It was not decorated with anything. It was the voice of a man who had been running a hardpack for 20 years and had just run 4 hours of emergency operations and had absolutely nothing left to spend on performance. Now. Voss looked at him for a long moment. The moment had a specific weight. 20 years of patience on one side, 12 years of manufactured isolation on the other, and between them the territory that one man had built and another man had spent 2 decades trying to take. Then Voss said, "Stand down." His wolves stopped. Cole's wolves held their formation. Vane's wolves held theirs. The Narrows went to a silence that was not peace, but was the thing before peace, the specific silence of a situation that had reached its resolution point and was waiting for the weight to shift. Ronan looked at Cole. Secure them. All of them. Eastern perimeter force, too. Your wolves have that covered? Already done, Cole said from behind him. Eastern force surrendered 12 minutes ago. Ronan turned back to Voss. He expected to feel something at this point. The weight of 20 years, the architecture of the lie dismantled, the man who had engineered the wound standing in front of him in his own territory, contained, finished. He expected something that would tell him the shape of what this was. What he felt instead was a kind of clean exhaustion, the exhaustion of a man who has been running for too long in the wrong direction and has finally stopped. And underneath that, cutting through the exhaustion with a specificity that he didn't try to manage, he needed to know that Kieran was safe. He turned to Serena. She was there. She had come in behind him during the final approach, and he hadn't looked at her during the engagement because looking at her during the engagement was a luxury available only to men who didn't need to function, and Ronan needed to function. He looked at her now. She was unhurt. She met his gaze with the expression that he was learning to read, the expression that was not softness and was not warmth in the conventional sense, but was the specific look of someone who was present and real and not going anywhere. Kieran, he said. She held his gaze. He's here. Where? He came by the eastern route, she said. He didn't tell you because you would have stopped him. A pause. He wanted to see it. Ronan turned. 20 meters back from the Narrows, at the edge of the pack center's operational buildings, a 12-year-old boy stood with his arms at his sides and a cut on his forearm that was fresh and already clotting, which meant he had not come entirely uncontested by the eastern approach. He was looking at Ronan with the eyes that Ronan was going to spend a long time learning to meet, without the sensation of 12 years pressing on his sternum. Ronan walked toward him. He stopped 4 feet away, looked at the arm. What happened? One of Voss's eastern wolves didn't want to stand down, Kieran said. His voice was level. I changed his mind. You're 12. You keep saying that. Ronan looked at his son, at the cut on the arm, at the face that had watched a territorial containment and a principal confrontation with the same patient attention it had brought to the proving ground. Are you hurt anywhere else? Ronan said. No. You're certain? I'm certain. A pause. Are you? The question landed in Ronan's chest without warning. Not tactical, personal. Are you hurt? A 12-year-old who had spent his life building survival structures asking his father, for the first time, whether he was all right. Ronan was not all right in several respects that would take a significant amount of time to become all right. He had 2 cracked ribs from a contact engagement in the Narrows that he hadn't mentioned to anyone and was not planning to mention until the situation was fully secured. He had a gash along his left forearm that matched Kieran's in approximate severity and location, which he noticed now with a kind of grim amusement at the coincidence. He had 12 years of manufactured grief sitting in his chest like a structural element that someone had just informed him didn't need to be there. I'll manage, he said. Kieran looked at him for a moment with those amber-green eyes. That's not an answer, Kieran said. And before Ronan could respond, before the situation could resolve into something manageable, before the weight could find a shape that was bearable, a sound came from the southern edge of the pack center that had nothing to do with the contained Voss force, nothing to do with Cole's security wolves, nothing that should have been possible given that every approach had been accounted for. The pack center's emergency alarm. Not the standard security alert, the deep, specific tone that meant structural threat to the pack itself, the alarm that hadn't sounded in Iron Hollow in 16 years, and that Ronan had heard only once in his lifetime. Cole's voice came sharp through the communication device still in Ronan's hand. Ronan, the succession vault. Ronan went cold. I thought it was locked, he said. It was. Cole's voice had the quality of a man reporting something that shouldn't be possible and was happening anyway. Marsh is in the building. He must have had a secondary access code, something that wasn't in the standard system. Ronan, he's inside the vault, and he's not alone. Ronan was already moving. He's got 2 wolves with him, Cole said, and he's at the Charter Archive. The Charter Archive, where the original Iron Hollow founding documents were kept. Where the succession records, the territorial deeds, the complete administrative history of the pack, including every document that would serve as evidence in an arbitration case against Voss, against Croft, against everyone who had spent 20 years building the machinery of this particular theft, were stored in physical form. Cole. He's burning them, Cole said. Ronan, he's burning the archive. Ronan ran. Not the controlled pace of the Narrows engagement, not the operational efficiency of a man managing multiple variables simultaneously. He ran the way a man runs when the thing at stake has finally resolved itself into something simple and irreducible. A building, a fire, and everything that mattered inside it. The succession vault was in the administrative block, ground level, northeast corner, 40 meters from the Narrows. He covered it in 12 seconds. Cole had 2 wolves on the exterior door. The door was closed and the frame showed the specific distortion of a lock that had been overridden from the inside. The secondary access Marsh had used. Some contingency code that existed outside the standard system, built in quietly over years of administrative access by a man who had been preparing for exactly this moment. Ronan hit the door with his shoulder at full pace, and it gave on the second impact. The archive room was 12 by 15 feet, shelved floor to ceiling on 3 walls, the 4th wall holding the primary document cases, fireproof steel cabinets that protected the original territorial deeds and summit records, but open shelving on the adjacent wall holding the administrative correspondence archive, the succession filing records, the charter amendment history. Paper. 12 years of paper, some of it irreplaceable in the specific sense of documents that existed in no other form. Marsh had started with the open shelving. The fire was not large yet. He'd had maybe 4 minutes, and the archive room's low oxygen environment was slowing the burn, but it was real. A section of correspondence files on the middle shelf already consumed, the adjacent materials curling at the edges with the particular speed of dry paper in contact with accelerant. One of Marsh's two wolves was feeding material to the burn. The other was between Ronan and the room. Marsh himself was at the far wall with the document case open, pulling files. Ronan went through the wolf in the doorway the way he went through things that were in the way. Not cleanly, not without cost. A forearm across his throat and a redirection that put him into the doorframe hard enough to end his participation. The cracked ribs announced themselves with a specific quality of pain that Ronan filed under later and kept moving. The second wolf turned from the fire. Ronan looked at him. Down! The wolf looked at the man who had just come through the door, at pace with two cracked ribs and a forearm already bleeding, and an expression that communicated a very specific arithmetic about what was going to happen next. He went down. Marsh turned from the far wall. He was 64 years old, silver-haired, soft in the way of men who had wielded administrative power for so long that physical capability had become irrelevant to their self-concept. He held a document case against his chest and looked at Ronan with an expression that was doing something complicated, not fear exactly, not defiance exactly, something between them. The expression of a man who had made an irreversible decision and was now inhabiting the consequences of it. Ashvale, Marsh said. Ronan crossed the room and took the document case from him. Not a struggle. Marsh released it, which was its own information. He was not prepared for the physical reality of Ronan in close proximity any more than Voss's guards had been. There were men who existed in the world of decisions and men who existed in the world of execution, and when those two categories collided, the outcome was generally not a surprise. Ronan set the case on the table, looked at what Marsh had pulled, charter amendment files, the succession records, the correspondence archive that cross-referenced Croft's operational history with PAC administrative decisions over 12 years. The burn was still going. He turned, grabbed the emergency suppression unit from the wall mount that standard PAC building code required in every archive room, and killed the fire in 45 seconds. The section of correspondence files was gone. The adjacent materials were scorched but intact. The primary document cases on the far wall were undamaged. He stood in the smoke-smelling room and breathed through the ribs and looked at Marsh. "How much did you burn?" he said. Marsh was quiet. "How much?" 3 years of administrative correspondence. Marsh's voice was controlled in the way of a man controlling something that wanted to shake. 2003 through 2006. The period when the initial deception framework was constructed. The period when Serena left. When Croft built the two narratives. When the operational foundation of everything that followed was laid. "You were part of it from the beginning," Ronan said. Marsh didn't deny it. Croft needed a secondary counsel layer, someone who could validate his administrative decisions without raising questions. I was recruited the same year he was. We came in together." Ronan looked at him for a long moment. Marsh had been on his council for 14 years, had sat across from him in deliberation sessions, had reviewed territorial proposals, had said the things that council members said and performed the function that council members performed, had looked Ronan in the face on 100 separate occasions, and had known, every single time, the shape of the lie that the room was built on. There was a version of Ronan, the version that had existed for most of the last 12 years, who would have felt rage at this, clean, structural rage, the kind that simplified things. Marsh had betrayed him. The answer to betrayal was consequence, and consequence was a thing Ronan Ashvale knew how to deliver. What he felt instead was something slower and more complicated. Not the absence of rage, the presence of something beneath it that the rage had been keeping company for a long time without being acknowledged. The rage was real, and underneath it was the exhaustion of a man who had spent 12 years being angry at the wrong thing. Marsh was a consequence to deliver. That was true, and it would be delivered, through arbitration, through the proper channel that existed for exactly this purpose. That was what institutions were for. Not the elimination of wrongdoing, but the proper accounting of it. The formal record that said this happened, and here's the price. But the rage underneath the rage, the wound that had been structural for 12 years, that was not Marsh's to answer for. That was not even Croft's to answer for in the way that would actually settle it. That one was his. He had made himself into something that served an enemy's design, not because he was weak, because he was human, because the story he'd been given was built to be believed, because he had looked at the manufactured evidence of Serena's departure and had taken it into himself and had done what people do with wounds that don't have a visible exit. He had built around it. He had made the wound load-bearing. He had run a pack on it for 12 years and called it strength. That was not Croft's doing in the final accounting. That was his. "Cole," he said into the communication device. "Here. I need 2 wolves in the archive room. Marsh is in custody. The fire is out." He paused. "Get a full inventory of what was lost. Everything that was on those shelves, I want a reconstruction list. Cross-reference with Croft's testimony and the Coldstone submission. Anything that was burned, we rebuild from secondary sources." "Understood." A pause. "Ronan. Voss?" "Formally detained pending multi-pack arbitration. He doesn't leave Iron Hollow territory until the Council confirms the transfer protocol." He looked at Marsh. "Neither does Marsh." Cole said he'd handle it. Ronan walked out of the archive room and into the cold air of the pack center and stood there for a moment with his hand pressed against his left side where the ribs were informing him comprehensively of their current condition. Serena was there. She had come in behind him, not into the building. She'd been at the exterior with Ida and Cole's wolves, managing the outer perimeter while the interior situation resolved. She looked at the way he was standing, at his hand on his side, at the blood on his forearm, and then she looked at his face. "The archive," she said, "mostly intact. 3 years of correspondence lost. The rest is recoverable." She studied him. "And Marsh?" "In custody." He looked at her steadily. "It's over." Serena was quiet for a moment. The packed center around them was settling into the specific texture of a situation that is resolved, the operational noise dropping, wolves moving from combat readiness to containment management, the transition from crisis to aftermath. It had its own quality, that transition. It always did. The adrenaline finding nowhere left to go. "Your ribs," she said. "Later." "Ronan, later," he said again, and something in the way he said it was not deflection. It was a different kind of request. Not later as in never. Later as in there are things that need to happen first, and I know the difference now between things that can wait and things that can't. She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded. The next 6 hours were administrative in the way that only the aftermath of institutional crisis could be. The securing of the detained wolves, the communication with Hewitt, and the remote council session, the formal documentation of Voss's territorial incursion that would anchor the arbitration case, Cole running inventory on the archive room, the Havens Ridge Wolves, who had come in on the Eastern Intercept joining Iron Hollow's pack wolves, and the containment management with a lack of friction that said something about how Serena had built her operation. Ronan moved through all of it. He moved through it with the ribs and the arm and the fatigue that was now deep in his bones, and he moved through it with a quality that several of his pack wolves noticed and would describe later to each other in terms they didn't quite have language for, something different, something that was still the alpha they knew, but stripped of the specific coldness that had always made him efficient and isolated simultaneously. Croft arrived from Coldstone in the early evening, under the voluntary accompaniment of Vane's wolves, and submitted himself formally to pack custody. He was placed in secured quarters with the specific provision that his testimony remained available to the arbitration council. He did not ask for anything. He sat in the room they gave him and looked at the floor with the expression of a man who had set down a very heavy thing and was still learning what his hands felt like without it. Ronan did not visit him that evening. That conversation would happen, in the proper time and the proper format. Not tonight. Tonight he found Kieran. The boy was in the pack center's northern yard, the open space where Iron Hollow's wolves gathered for pack events, currently quiet in the early dark with just the ambient light from the surrounding buildings. He was sitting on the stone wall at the yard's edge, his injured arm cleaned and wrapped by someone with competent hands, looking at the sky with the specific quality of adolescent contemplation that Ronan recognized as the contemplation of someone who had processed more in one day than most people processed in a year and was now sitting in the silence on the other side of it. Ronan sat beside him on the wall. They were quiet for a while. The night was clear, The highland sky doing what it did when the weather held, opening up, going deep, the kind of darkness that reminded you of scale. Marsh burned the correspondence files, Ronan said, 2003 through 2006. Kieran didn't respond immediately. Then, the construction period. Yes. Does it compromise the arbitration case? Croft's testimony fills most of the gap. The Coldstone submission covers the seal verification. The missing correspondence weakens the timeline, reconstruction, but doesn't eliminate it. He looked at the sky. It'll hold. Kieran nodded. He was turning something over in his hands. A piece of stone from the wall, smooth, the kind of thing hands find when they need something to do while the mind is occupied. I watched you go through that door, Kieran said, when you ran to the archive building. Ronan said nothing. You went in without waiting for Cole's wolves, with cracked ribs. A pause. I could see it in how you were moving, the way you were holding your left side. You have a good eye. My mother taught me to read how people carry injuries. The stone turned in his hands. She said you have to know who's compromised around you at all times, including whether it's you. A silence. She taught me that after she'd spent 4 years building something alone, without backup, without any structure that she didn't build herself. Because that's what you do when everything else has been taken from you. Ronan received that, the full weight of it, without deflecting it into something manageable. I know, he said. She never told me it was hard, Kieran said. She just showed me how she did it. That's its own kind of lesson. He stopped turning the stone. Harder than the fighting, I think. Watching her not tell me it was hard. The yard was quiet. Somewhere in the pack center, a door opened and closed. The night settled. I spent 12 years, Ronan said, becoming someone who didn't need anything. He said it without performance, without the compressed management that had characterized everything he'd said about the last 12 years until now. Just the fact of it, plain. I thought that was the lesson, that needing things was the exposure point, the place where damage entered. He looked at his hands on the wall. I was wrong. The not needing was the damage. I just couldn't see it from inside. Kieran was quiet for a moment. I know, he said. 2 words. The same 2 words Ronan had given him, returned, not mimicry, not performance of maturity. The specific acknowledgement of someone who had spent 12 years watching his mother carry a version of the same thing from the other side. They sat with that for a while. I haven't decided, Kieran said eventually. About what I called you before. About the name. I know. I mean, I haven't decided that it's changed. What I said at the proving ground. He looked at Ronan directly. I carry my mother's name. That's still true. That's not going to unbe true because you rode hard and fought well today. I know that too, Ronan said. But, Kieran paused. The word sat in the air, and the pause that followed it had the weight of a 12-year-old choosing something very carefully. But I'm willing to be here, in this place, for a while, to see what it is. Another pause. If you want that. Something moved in Ronan's chest that he did not try to manage. Yes, he said, I want that. Kieran looked at him for a moment. Then he looked back at the sky. The stone turned once more in his hands, and then he set it on the wall between them. Not given, just placed. Present, something that was there. They sat in the dark together for a long time. Done. The weeks that followed were not easy, and Ronan did not pretend they were. The arbitration process was long and technical, and occasionally vicious, in the way that formal proceedings became vicious when the stakes were real and the parties had resources and history. Voss engaged legal representation from 3 different pack-adjacent territories and contested every document in the submission with the patience of a man who had been building leverage for 20 years and was not prepared to lose it in a single proceeding. Croft's testimony was challenged repeatedly on the grounds of his own culpability. The argument that a confessed operative's account couldn't anchor a case against his principles was not without procedural merit, and it cost the Arbitration Council 4 additional weeks of corroborating evidence before the case achieved the threshold required. Marsh tried once to negotiate a reduced accountability arrangement through a secondary channel. Ronan closed the channel and filed the attempt as additional evidence of ongoing obstruction. The archive reconstruction took 2 months. Some of the burned correspondence was genuinely irreplaceable. 3 years of written record, gone. The absence a specific shape in the administrative history. Ronan accepted the absence. There was a lesson in it that he didn't need to articulate to understand. Not everything that was destroyed could be restored. Some losses were permanent. You built the record you could build and you moved forward on what remained. The charter amendment passed in the first formal council session after Marsh's removal. Section 14, subsection 3, the succession default clause that named the administrative elder as interim alpha in the absence of an established succession line, was struck. In its place, a distributed succession protocol that required confirmation by a council supermajority and a PAC assembly vote. No single point of failure. No administrative position with unilateral succession authority. Croft sat in his secured quarters and cooperated fully with the arbitration process and did not ask for anything and received a formal accountability finding that stripped him of his administrative position, his PAC standing, and his territorial rights within Iron Hollow permanently. He was not imprisoned. The charges against him were administrative and civil rather than criminal by the standards of the PAC legal framework. But he was banished from the territory with a formal record that would follow him to any PAC he approached for the rest of his life. On the morning he left, he asked to speak to Ronan. Ronan went. They stood in the entrance hall of the administrative block, the building where Croft had worked for 30 years, where he had built the machinery of Ronan's isolation, where Marsh had tried to burn the evidence of what they'd done together. "I don't expect forgiveness," Croft said. "I know you don't. I want to say something that isn't about what I expect." He looked at Ronan with the face of a man who had spent weeks in a room with the full accounting of his own choices and had come out the other side of that reckoning with something that was not peace and was not resolution, but was at least honesty. "The boy, Kieran, He stopped, started again. "Whatever you become to him and whatever he becomes to you, don't let it be measured against what was taken. Measure it against what's possible from here. That's the only accounting that can actually pay out." Ronan looked at him. "You built the conditions," Ronan said. "I built what I built inside them. Both of those things are true simultaneously, and neither of them cancels the other." Croft nodded. "Go," Ronan said. Croft went. Serena did not leave Iron Hollow immediately. Haven's Ridge required her presence. She rode back and forth in the first month, managing the sanctuary's operations while the arbitration proceedings required her testimony at intervals. But she was there, and then she was back, and gradually the intervals between her presence at Iron Hollow shortened. They did not rebuild what they'd had before. They had not been given back the past. The 12 years remained the 12 years, the absence remained the absence, and neither of them was interested in performing a reunion that glossed over the actual texture of what had been lost and what remained. What they built instead was slower and more honest, and built on the real ground of who they had each become during the time that had been taken from them. She was not the woman who had left. She was someone who had taken an impossible situation and built something that mattered out of it, not despite the difficulty, but through it, using the survival instinct that difficulty had sharpened into the foundation of a place where abandoned wolves found footing. That woman was more than the woman who had left, and Ronan found that he was not intimidated by the more. He was, the word arrived with the particular surprise of a word that belongs to a category you'd closed off, grateful for it. She told him once, in the 3rd month, when they were sitting outside the PAC Center in the late afternoon with the Highland light doing what it did in autumn, going gold, going long, making everything it touched look like something that was almost over and almost beginning. She told him that she had been afraid, when she came to Coldstone, that she would find the Alpha Croft had been building. The sealed-off, instrumental, utterly self-sufficient man who had made himself immune to everything, including the things that were worth keeping. "And instead," she said, "and instead," he agreed. She looked at him with the expression he had been learning, the one that was not softness and was not warmth in the easy sense, but was the specific quality of a person who was choosing to be present, who was making the active decision of presence rather than the passive circumstance of it. "You were always going to come back," she said. "Not because of me, because of him. Because that boy exists, and whatever Croft built couldn't survive contact with his own son." Ronan looked at the middle distance. The light was doing its autumn thing, generous and honest. "He's the one who didn't break," Ronan said. "Not me." Serena was quiet for a moment. "He learned that from his mother." "I know." Another silence. Comfortable in the way that silences became comfortable when the people inside them had stopped needing to fill them with management. "Ronan." Her voice had the specific quality of someone who has been deciding whether to say something and has decided. "I'm not coming back to what we were. That's not available. That's not what I'm offering." "I know. What I'm offering is—" She paused, choosing carefully. "Whatever we build from here, on the actual ground, with actual people." A beat. "If that's enough." He looked at her. The actual ground. The 12 years between them, the archive with its 3-year gap, the boy who was currently somewhere in the PAC Center learning Iron Hollow's territorial survey methodology from Cole because he had decided, without announcement, that understanding the land he might one day be responsible for was a worthwhile use of his time. The man Ronan had become inside a lie, and the man he was trying to become in its absence. The woman who had built something real out of destruction and had not asked him to pretend that made the destruction fine. All of it. The actual ground. "It's enough," he said. The renewal ceremony came 3 months later, the annual marking of the PAC's founding, traditionally a gathering of the full Iron Hollow membership, and invited allied representatives with the formal acknowledgement of the PAC's ongoing commitments. Ronan had never placed particular weight on it beyond the institutional function. It was ceremony. He had done ceremony. This year was different. The arbitration had concluded 2 weeks prior. Voss had been formally sanctioned, his territorial holdings subject to a 5-pack review commission, his operational capacity inside the northern corridor eliminated. The sanctions were not punitive in the dramatic sense. They were structural, the kind that removed capability rather than imposed suffering, which Ronan had argued for specifically because structural was what lasted. The PAC had spent 3 months watching their alpha do things he had not done before. Not dramatic things. Not declarations or speeches or formal announcements of change. The change had been in the texture of daily operation, in who he consulted before decisions, in the distributed authority of the amended charter, in the presence of Haven's Ridge Wolves at PAC Center who had come initially as operational support during the Voss containment and had remained because the integration was useful, and nobody had decided to stop it. In the way Cole now ran security briefings that included perspective from Serena's tactical experience, because she had 12 years of running a protection operation, and that knowledge had value that didn't need a title attached to it. Small things. The kind of things that changed a culture, rather than announced a change in one. The renewal ceremony was held in the northern yard, the same space where Ronan had sat with Kieran in the dark 3 months ago. The full pack assembled, representatives from Stoneback and 3 other allied packs present, vain in attendance with the specific expression of a man who had made a bet on a long shot and was observing the outcome. Hewitt was there, 70 years old, having made the journey from her residential quarters on the western edge of PAC territory, sitting in the front row with the posture of a woman who had decided that attending this particular ceremony was worth the effort of getting there. The ceremony proceeded through its traditional elements. Ronan kept those intact. The territorial acknowledgments, the PAC commitments, the formal recognitions. He had no interest in dismantling tradition for its own sake. Tradition was the PAC's memory of itself, and a PAC without memory was a PAC that had to learn everything over again from nothing. Then it was done. The formal structure complete. And Kieran walked to the front of the yard. No announcement, no direction from Ronan or Serena. Ronan saw Serena's expression when Kieran stood and walked forward, and the expression told him she had not been told this was coming either. Kieran had decided this himself, in his own time, in the privacy of his own assessment. He stood in front of the assembled pack and the allied representatives and the 70-year-old council member and his father and his mother. And he was 12 years old with his mother's eyes and his father's jaw, and 3 months of Iron Hollow territorial survey methodology in his working memory, and a cut on his forearm that had healed to a thin scar that matched the one on Ronan's left arm. He looked at the assembled pack. "My name is Kieran," he said. His voice had settled in the months since Coldstone. Not fully. still carrying the in-between quality of a voice that hadn't finished deciding, but steadier. Carrying. I came here as Kieran Vale. That's still true. My mother's name is mine, and it will always be mine because it was built from something real. A pause. The yard was completely silent. A name given at birth is information, Kieran said. It tells you where you came from. A name that's earned is different. It tells you what someone chose to become, and what they chose to stay when staying was the harder thing. He looked at Ronan. Ronan stood in the northern yard of his pack's territory and looked at his son and felt everything that 12 years of compression had been keeping down move through him with the specific quality of something that had been waiting for the conditions to become bearable. It was not comfortable. It was the opposite of comfortable. It was the feeling of a structural wall being removed, everything that had leaned on it shifting, settling, finding a new configuration. I've watched this man for 3 months, Kieran said. He was still looking at Ronan, direct, unperformed. I watched him ride 4 hours with cracked ribs to protect his pack. I watched him ask for help when asking was harder than going alone. I watched him give people accountability for what they'd done without making the accounting about his own damage. A pause. I watched him keep every promise he made, not the big ones, the small ones, the ones that nobody else was tracking. The yard was held in the complete stillness of people who understood they were witnessing something that was not a ceremony. A family name isn't inherited, Kieran said. It's earned, through sacrifice and truth, and showing up when showing up costs something real. He looked at the assembled wolves and allied representatives, and at Vane, who had the expression of a man recalibrating something he'd thought was already calibrated, and at Hewitt, who had the specific expression of a 70-year-old woman who had seen many things and was currently revising her assessment of how many things she'd actually seen. My name is Kieran Ashvale, he said. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then Hewitt started to applaud, and she was 70 years old, and her hands made a sound like 2 pieces of authority recognizing each other. And after that, the rest followed, and the northern yard of Iron Hollow Pack came back to sound. Ronan stood in it. He was not able in that moment to perform anything. The 20 years of controlled expression, the comprehensive capacity to keep what was happening in his chest from happening on his face, all of it was present, and all of it was insufficient, and for the first time in a very long time that was not a failure. It was just what was true. His eyes were wet. He did not try to make them otherwise. Kieran walked back to where his father was standing and stopped in front of him and looked up at him with the amber-green eyes that had been looking at him for 3 months with patient, careful, earned increments of trust. Ronan put his hand on his son's shoulder. Not a performance, not a declaration, just a hand on a shoulder, the specific weight of a man saying, I am here, I am real, I am not going anywhere, and this is the only version of that statement that means anything. Kieran put his hand over his father's, held it there. They stood like that while the yard continued around them, Serena coming to stand beside them with the expression of someone who had built something extraordinary out of the hardest possible materials and was now watching it stand on its own. And the Highland light did its late autumn thing, going long and gold and honest, making no promises about tomorrow and no apologies for today. That was enough. That was, in the final accounting, everything.